Go ahead and get comfortable. Find your position, pull something warm around you, and let the room go dark if it wants to. We are going to spend a long time in Springfield tonight, and there is no reason to rush any of it. The Simpsons has been on television since the 17th of December, 1989. Most people who watch it today grew up with it already running. It was there when you came home from school. It was there after dinner when the kitchen was still warm and someone was doing dishes in the other room. It was there late at night, flickering out of the living room while the rest of the house went quiet, and the laugh track from whatever episode was playing mixed with the sound of the neighborhood settling into itself for the evening. For a lot of people, The Simpsons is less a television show and more a kind of atmospheric constant, something that has simply always existed in the background of their lives, the way a familiar streetlight exists outside your window, something you would only notice if it went dark. And because it has always been there, because it has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive, most people assume they already know its story. They know the broad outlines. Matt Groening, the legal pad doodles, the Fox network, the golden age, the decline that everyone argues about, the predictions that went viral. The oral histories and the anniversary specials and the critical retrospectives have been produced in quantities large enough to fill entire libraries. But there is an entire layer of The Simpsons that those retrospectives do not cover. The quiet controversies. The behind-the-scenes fractures that shaped seasons without ever appearing in them. The episodes that were pulled from circulation, and the decisions about why, the salary wars that nearly ended the show and changed it irrevocably, the things that were inserted into the animation by people whose names never appeared in the credits, the characters who vanished and the specific, human reasons some of them vanished, the finales that were planned and shelved, the real towns named Springfield that did not appreciate what the association implied, the guest stars who had regrets, the writers who left, and what the show lost when they left. That is what tonight is about. Not the famous controversies. The ones nobody talks about. The ones that happened in rooms without microphones and in production schedules that the audience never saw, in the specific decisions made by specific people in moments that shaped the show permanently without ever being publicly acknowledged. We will take our time with each one. There is no reason to rush. The night is long and Springfield has been waiting in the background for 36 years. It will wait a little longer while we find the right way in. So settle in. Let your breathing slow. Let the day fall away from you the way days do when you finally give them permission to. We are going to Springfield. Number Section 1. The secret language of the couch gag. Every episode of The Simpsons begins the same way. The camera moves through the town in a familiar arc, past the sign at the town limits, past the nuclear plant with its cooling towers standing against the sky, past the school and the bar and the convenience store. Picking up the family members one by one from their various locations in Springfield, they race home. They arrive at the living room couch in a sequence that has played, in some version, at the beginning of every single episode for 36 seasons. It is by raw numbers the most watched piece of animation in the history of the medium. Hundreds of millions of people have seen it. The specific music that plays underneath it is probably lodged in the long-term memory of more human beings than almost any other piece of music created in the last century. And the couch gag that ends it, the brief, absurdist punchline that changes with every episode, has been hiding things in plain sight since the very first year. Most people who watch the show treat the couch gag as a formality. Familiar, often funny, sometimes very funny, sometimes perfunctory, always brief. The general understanding is that it exists primarily as a practical tool, a way to vary the length of the opening sequence from episode to episode without cutting into the story itself. Some episodes run long and the couch gag is short. Some run short and the couch gag is extended. This explanation is true. It is the official explanation offered by the production. But the official explanation and the complete explanation are not the same thing. And the more carefully you study the couch gags in sequence, the more clearly you can see that they function as something the show never announced them to be. A running, creative temperature reading of the production's internal state at the moment each one was made. The connection is not perfect. Not every couch gag is a statement about what was happening in the writer's room. Many of them are simply jokes, and good ones, made by talented people who were in the business of making jokes. But the overall pattern, visible across decades and dozens of gags, is remarkably consistent. The ambition and confidence of the couch gags tracks with the ambition and confidence of the show itself. When the show was at its creative strongest, the couch gags were strange and inventive, and slightly unsettling in their willingness to break the visual logic of the show for 30 seconds. When the show was in its more uncertain middle period, the couch gags became more conservative, more willing to repeat a safe idea rather than commit to a new one. Consider the gags from the early seasons. The family arrives on the couch and the television set is replaced by a fireplace. The couch shrinks until only Homer fits. A band appears from nowhere and begins playing. A photographer emerges and takes a picture. The couch becomes a rocket ship. These gags share a quality beyond their individual cleverness. They are structurally confident. Each one has a single clear idea, executed cleanly without hedging. They land and they are done. There is no sense that the people who made them were uncertain about whether they were funny. They made the joke they wanted to make and moved on. Now compare those to the couch gags from roughly seasons 9 through 12, the period many fans cite as the show's first significant creative decline. The gags from this period are more likely to involve complicated setups, more likely to reference other gags or other media, more likely to be visually busy in ways that feel like activity substituting for the confidence of a single clean idea. They are not bad. Several of them are genuinely funny, but they have a quality of effort that the early gags do not. A quality of trying hard to demonstrate their own worth that suggests the people making them were less certain than the earlier team had been. This pattern is not what you would expect if the couch gags were purely functional tools. If they were only runtime adjustment devices, their quality and ambition would be unrelated to the creative state of the production. The fact that the relationship is this consistent suggests that the couch gag, because it was made with slightly less oversight than the episodes themselves, was one of the places where the production's actual mood leaked through. In 2010, a couch gag aired that had never been done before and has not quite been done since. The British street artist Banksy, working under anonymity as was his practice, was given creative control of the opening sequence of a season 22 episode. What he produced was a couch gag that depicted the show's production not as a creative endeavor but as a sweatshop. The sequence showed underpaid and miserable workers laboring in terrible conditions to produce the animation, merchandise, and licensed products that generate enormous commercial value for a corporation that neither knows nor cares about the conditions of their labor. Unicorns were used to punch holes in merchandise. A panda was painting animation cells with its tail while being clearly mistreated. The finished work traveled through a process that was degrading at every step before arriving on the screen of American viewers who had no idea how it got there. Banksy made a piece of political art about the exploitation of creative labor and convinced the producers of the most commercially successful animated show on American television to put it in their opening credits. Fox's response to what Banksy had produced, according to multiple people who were in the room during the review process, was incomplete in a specific and revealing way. The satirical intent of the sequence was not fully understood by everyone who needed to approve it before broadcast. The executives who reviewed it saw an unusual and edgy opening sequence for an animated show. What they were actually watching was a critique of the commercial infrastructure of the show itself, of the overseas animation pipeline, of the licensing deals and the merchandise revenue, and the specific economic arrangement that turned creative work into a product stream. They approved it. It aired. The reactions after broadcast ranged across a wide spectrum. A significant portion of the audience loved it immediately and without reservation. It spread rapidly on the early social media platforms of 2010 and became one of the most discussed single pieces of content the show had produced in years. Critics praised it. Animation historians noted it. Inside Fox, the response was considerably more complicated. There were conversations about how this had gotten through, about who had signed off on what at which stage of the review process, about whether this was the kind of content the network wanted associated with one of its flagship properties. These conversations did not result in the segment being removed from future broadcasts, but they contributed to a review of the approval processes around unusual or outside-produced content, and the practical effect was a tighter oversight structure for similar creative experiments in subsequent seasons. The Banksy gag is the most famous of the couch gags produced by outside directors, but it is not the only one, and the others deserve attention they rarely receive. In 2014, the French director Sylvain Chomet, whose animated films have the quality of watching hand-drawn dreams, was given the opening of a season 25 episode to do with as he chose. What he produced was a brief, wordless story about two people, an elderly couple who had once been young lovers. The sequence moved through their shared history with the specific melancholy of someone who has thought a great deal about what time does to love. At the very end, the Simpson family appeared, sat on the couch, and looked appropriately bewildered by what they had just been part of. The sequence was beautiful and entirely alien and had almost nothing to do with The Simpsons in any conventional sense. Chomet's gag never received the attention the Banksy gag did, partly because it lacked the political charge that had made the Banksy version a shareable object on social media, and partly because its specific qualities, its quietness, its emotional weight, its willingness to slow down and sit with feeling were exactly the qualities that do not generate viral attention. But within the world of people who think seriously about animation, it is considered one of the more remarkable things the show ever produced. A mainstream American animated sitcom, handing its opening credits to a French filmmaker known for quiet, melancholy, hand-drawn stories, and simply letting him do his thing. The context of that gag matters more than the gag itself, considered in isolation. 2014 was a year when the show's cultural relevance, measured by the kind of broad cultural conversation it generated, was significantly reduced from what it had been in the 90s or even the early 2000s. The show was still being made and still being watched by large audiences, but it was no longer the cultural event it had once been. Inviting outside directors with established aesthetic identities to take over the opening of specific episodes was a way of reaching outward for artistic credibility that the show wasn't fully generating from within at that moment. It was a statement. This show still cares about art, still has the relationships and the ambition to produce something unexpected and beautiful, even if the episodes themselves have become more predictable. There is a couch gag from season 25 that most viewers would describe, if they remember it at all, as a visual joke about television and media consumption. The family arrives on the couch and everything appears normal. Then the camera pulls back, further and further, revealing that the couch scene exists inside a television set, which is itself inside a living room, which is itself inside another television, which continues outward through nested layers of screens until the image is too small to see. The sequence is done in near silence, with only the ambient hum of electronics. The people who made this gag have described it, in conversations that were not widely reported, as an expression of something they were genuinely feeling at that point in the show's run. 25 seasons, 25 years of making a show about a family living inside a television. The nested television gag is a genuine question dressed as a visual joke, and the near silence underneath it is the sound of people sitting with a question they can feel but not quite answer. The practice of the couch gag as hidden communication extends back further than the outside director experiments. For most of the show's run, the couch gag was produced with a degree of creative autonomy that was not available in the main episodes. The episodes themselves were subject to extensive development processes, network notes, standards and practices review, showrunner oversight, and multiple rounds of revision before they reached their final form. The couch gag, because it was short and ancillary and not the primary creative product being reviewed, often moved through the process with less scrutiny. This created a space where the people making it had more freedom to express something genuine, something that reflected the actual mood of the production rather than the version being packaged for the audience and the network. The couch gag became, over time, the place where the show talked to itself, where the people inside the machine left notes for each other and for future viewers patient enough to read them. There is a specific category of couch gag, spread across the show's history, that functions as a direct response to something that had happened in the production during the period in which that gag was made. These are the hardest to identify with certainty, because you need knowledge of what was happening in the production at that time to understand what you're looking at, but they are there. The couch gags made during periods of creative transition in the writer's room have a different quality from ones made during periods of stability. The ones made during contract negotiations have a different quality from the ones made when those negotiations had concluded. The ones made in the aftermath of a significant departure from the production team have a different quality from the ones made when the team was intact and comfortable. None of this is verifiable through official statements. No one in the production has ever publicly acknowledged using the couch gag this way. But the pattern is too consistent over too long a period to be entirely coincidental. And the couch gag is the right size for this kind of communication. Short enough to escape serious scrutiny, visible enough to reach the audience, permanent enough to remain in the record. A 30-second statement, made every week for 36 years, in a language that most of the audience never learned to read. And then there is the layer that has nothing to do with the American production at all. We will return to this in more detail later, but it belongs here as well. The couch gag was one of the places where the Korean animation studio that produced much of the show's animation left its own marks in the frames. Small signatures. Tiny acts of creative ownership by people who were doing the actual drawing and who received almost none of the credit. Things inserted into the backgrounds of the gags that the American production team either missed during review or noticed and chose not to address. The couch gag is 30 seconds of animation. It plays at the beginning of every episode. Most viewers have watched it hundreds of times without thinking carefully about it. But it has been, for 36 years, the place where the show communicates in a language that most of its audience has never been taught. A language of images and ambition and restraint and color and motion that speaks most clearly when you understand what was happening in the room where it was made. In a show about a family that has never spoken plainly about what it's actually going through, the couch gag is the most honest thing the show produces. Which is fitting, because it's also the part that most people dismiss as a formality. If you're watching this late at night, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. And if you want more nights like this one, go ahead and subscribe. We will be here whenever you need somewhere quiet to go. Number section 2. The voice behind the curtain, the salary wars, and what they changed. There is a version of the world in which The Simpsons ended in 1998. In that version, Season 9 is the last season. Homer Simpson speaks his final canonical words at the end of a Thursday night broadcast somewhere in the spring of that year, and then the show goes dark permanently. The family is preserved at that exact age, in that exact moment, before everything that comes after. That version almost happened. The reason it almost happened is one of the least romantic stories in the history of American television, because it is a story about money. About the gap between what something is worth and what the people who created that worth are being paid, and about what happens when that gap becomes large enough that the people on the short side of it decide they are done pretending it does not exist. To understand what happened in 1998, you need to understand what The Simpsons was worth at that particular moment. The show had been on the air for 8 years. It had generated not just ratings, success, but a cultural transformation, a wholesale alteration of what American animated television could be and what it could do. It had created a brand identity that had escaped the container of the show itself and was circulating in the culture independently. The yellow family that Matt Groening had sketched on a legal pad in a waiting room had become one of the most commercially valuable properties in the history of the entertainment industry. The merchandise revenue alone was staggering. Bart Simpson's face was on products in 40 countries. Homer's image appeared on items sold in airports from Los Angeles to Tokyo. The show's syndication deal, the arrangement that allowed local stations and international broadcasters to air past episodes, was generating hundreds of millions of dollars annually in revenue that flowed to Fox and to the production company. The show was not just a hit. It was an economic engine of a scale that had very few precedents in the history of American television. The principal voice cast had been well compensated by the standards of voice actors in the early to mid-90s. Their per-episode fees had increased through successive contract cycles, reflecting the show's commercial success. By the late 90s, they were earning, by the standards of their profession, extremely well. But by the standards of the value the show was generating, they were earning a fraction. The gap between their compensation and the commercial output of their performances was not a small one. It was the kind of gap that, when it becomes visible to the people on the short side of it, tends to produce the specific mixture of professional resentment and personal dignity that makes labor negotiations genuinely difficult to resolve. The negotiations that began in earnest in 1998 were the first time the cast came to the table operating as a unit rather than as individuals. Each principal cast member had their own individual agreement and their own individual representation, but for the purposes of this negotiation they coordinated their positions. 6 of the most essential people in the show's production acting collectively was a different kind of counterparty than 6 individuals negotiating separately, because the mathematics of the show's dependency were starker when you considered them all at once. Their opening position was not simply a raise in per-episode fees. They wanted a percentage of the profits generated by the show, an actual equity stake in what their performances had made. Not a large percentage, not a controlling interest, but a meaningful share of the extraordinary commercial value that their voices had generated over 8 years of continuous production. This was, in the history of television voice acting, an unprecedented ask. Voice actors on animated shows were not accustomed to negotiating ownership stakes in the shows they worked on. The precedent being proposed was new enough that it required everyone involved to think carefully about what it meant for other negotiations going forward. If the Simpsons cast received profit participation, who else would be positioned to ask for it? The question had implications that extended well beyond the specific show being negotiated. Fox's position was that ownership of the show's commercial output was not negotiable. The studio would discuss fees, the studio would discuss raises, significant ones, but the underlying economics of who owned the value created by The Simpsons were not on the table, and the studio was prepared to defend that position at considerable cost. During the months these negotiations played out, Fox engaged in contingency planning that has been documented by people who were in the building. The network was thinking seriously about what it would look like to continue the show without the current cast, whether the characters could be recast, whether audiences who had spent 8 years bonding to specific voices as the sonic embodiment of specific characters would accept different voices performing those characters. These were not idle daydreams. They were serious operational questions being considered by people who were paid to think seriously about operational questions. The conclusion of those planning sessions, as far as anyone on the outside has ever been able to determine, was that recasting was technically possible but commercially ruinous. The specific attachment that audiences had to the voices was too deep, too personal, too neurologically embedded through years of repeated viewing to be transferred cleanly to new performers. The voices were not interchangeable parts. They were the characters, in a way that the fictional designs on paper were not. The settlement that was eventually reached gave the cast a raise in their per-episode fees that was significant by any reasonable measure of television compensation. The specific numbers were not publicly disclosed at the time, but the fees reached a level that was historically unprecedented for voice actors on an ongoing animated series. The cast's financial position was dramatically improved. What they did not receive was the profit percentage, the equity stake, the ownership interest in the commercial value their performances had generated. That remained with the studio. The fundamental question of who owned what the show had built went unanswered, or rather was answered in the way that these questions are almost invariably answered when they reach their final stage, in favor of the party with greater institutional power. The show continued. Season 9 aired. The family went on. Homer kept going to work for a man who could not remember his name. But the 1998 negotiation established something in the show's production culture that did not go away when the settlement was signed. It established that the relationship between the cast and the network was fundamentally transactional, that the warmth and creative camaraderie that had characterized the show's early years was not incompatible with a willingness on both sides to fight hard for position. Everyone at the table now knew exactly what everyone else was worth. That knowledge is useful, and it is also a kind of loss. The innocence of not knowing is gone once you have sat across a negotiating table from someone and argued for months about the dollar value of your work. The second major salary standoff came in 2004 and was shaped by circumstances that were in some ways more bitter than the first one. By that point, the cast had spent 6 years living with the knowledge of exactly what the 1998 negotiation had established. When Fox came to the table in 2004 with a proposal that included language about reducing the cast's per-episode fees, the proposal was received not as an opening position to be negotiated, but as something approaching a declaration of bad faith. The studio's argument was that the show's ratings had declined from their peak, which was true, and that the cost structure of the production had grown to a point that was difficult to sustain at current fee levels, which was contested. The cast and their representatives viewed the ratings decline argument as a selective reading of the show's commercial picture, one that focused on the one metric that had moved against the studio's interests while ignoring the many that continued to favor it: syndication revenue, merchandise licensing, ongoing international rights fees, the value of the back catalog. The standoff of 2004 was resolved more quickly than the one in 1998, partly because the cast's collective position was stronger from having successfully negotiated together once before, and partly because the specific proposal Fox had led with the pay cut was difficult to defend publicly in a way that a request for profit participation was not. The cast received a raise. The fees went up rather than down. There is a third near cancellation that received almost no public attention, partly because it was resolved before it became an official story, and partly because the specific conversations that constituted it happened in rooms that were not accessible to journalists. Around 2011, there were serious discussions inside Fox about whether the show should be brought to a conclusion at the end of an upcoming season. The specific drivers of this discussion were multiple and reinforcing. The continued decline in weekly ratings, the continued increase in production costs including cast compensation, and a sense in certain quarters of the network that the show's moment of peak cultural relevance was receding in ways that made its indefinite continuation less commercially logical. The people who were in those conversations have described them as genuine, not performative threat-making designed to pressure the cast into another negotiation, but actual consideration of what it would look like to end the show on a specific timeline. The conclusion of those conversations was influenced by the show's syndication economics, which operated on a different and longer timeline than the network's quarterly ratings concerns. Existing and pending syndication agreements created commercial incentives for continued production that were powerful enough to outweigh the network's concern about declining weekly numbers. The show continued, but the conversations that happened in 2011 left a mark on how the people responsible for making it thought about the work. Several writers who were in the building during that period describe a shift in creative priorities in the seasons that followed, a move toward the specific emotional notes the show did best, and away from attempts to compete with younger or more fashionable forms of comedy. The salary history of The Simpsons is not a story about villains. Neither the cast nor the studio were wrong, exactly, in what they wanted. The cast had created enormous value and wanted to share in it. The studio had built the infrastructure that made the creation of that value possible and wanted to retain the commercial benefits. These are positions that make sense on their own terms. The conflict between them is a structural feature of commercial entertainment, not a moral failing of any particular party. But the conflict shaped the show in ways that are real and visible if you know where to look. It is part of the story of The Simpsons in the same way that the writer's room is part of the story, or the animation pipeline, or the guest stars, or the network politics. The show that exists is the show that existed within all of these pressures simultaneously, and understanding the pressures is part of understanding the show. There is one more thing about the salary history that almost never gets discussed. When the show began, the principal voice actors were working actors who had taken a job on a new animated series for a new network based on a property that had appeared in short animated segments on a sketch comedy program. They were not stars. They were working. The show made them something new, famous for voices that were not attached to visible faces, famous in the specific and peculiar way that a sound can become famous when millions of people associate it with specific feelings that they have been having in response to it for years. The show gave them that fame. It also, through the commercial success that fame generated, created the conditions for the salary conflicts that followed. The thing that made them valuable also made the negotiations necessary. They could not have one without the other. That is a strange kind of gift, and the people who received it have had decades to think about what they make of it. Number. Section 3. The episodes that were locked away. Most television shows have a complete and accessible archive. You can find every episode, in the correct order, on the appropriate platform. The show's history is legible and entire. What aired. What was produced can be found. The Simpsons does not work this way. Its relationship with its own archive is complicated in ways that have developed gradually over decades, shaped by world events and internal decisions, and the evolving politics of what certain kinds of humor mean in different cultural moments. There are episodes of The Simpsons that have been removed from streaming platforms and broadcast rotation. There are episodes that were altered before or after their initial broadcast. There are episodes that air in most countries but not in specific ones, and episodes that aired once and have been quietly managed out of easy access ever since. And then there are the decisions about specific episodes that were made publicly, with announcements and stated reasoning, that generated enormous amounts of discussion at the time, but that have since settled into the background of the show's history in ways that obscure how significant they were. The most significant of the publicly announced removals involved the Season 3 episode that is commonly known among fans as the Michael Jackson episode. For many years, it was considered one of the finest episodes in the show's entire history. The episode featured a large white man in a mental institution who claimed to be Michael Jackson and who befriended Homer and ultimately helped Bart write a birthday song for Lisa. The voice of this character was performed by Michael Jackson himself, under the pseudonym John J. Smith, in an arrangement that was an open secret among the show's fans, and that Jackson confirmed in interviews. For over 25 years, the episode was a staple of the show's canon. It appeared on best-of lists with regularity. It was cited as evidence of the show's creative ambition, its willingness to take large creative risks, its ability to be simultaneously silly and genuinely touching. Then in 2019, following the release of a documentary containing detailed allegations of child sexual abuse against Jackson by two individuals who had previously and publicly denied being abused, the show's principal producers announced that the episode was being permanently removed from all platforms and all future broadcasts. The announcement was made by James L. Brooks, Matt Groening, and Al Jean, and it was framed in terms of personal conscience. The decision landed differently for different people. Many viewers saw it as an appropriate response to serious allegations against Jackson, an acknowledgement that participation in his artistic legacy, even at the remove of an animated episode, was something that required reconsideration. Others argued that the episode's removal was an act of erasure that accomplished nothing of substance, that the allegations related to Jackson's personal conduct had nothing to do with the episode's content or with the experience of watching it, and that disappearing art, in response to allegations about an artist, set a precedent that was troubling regardless of one's views on the specific allegations. What received far less attention was the quieter question the removal opened about the show's relationship with its own archive. The Simpsons had always been understood to have a complete archive, a total record of its creative output that was preserved and accessible. The removal of even one episode was a departure from that understanding that carried implications for how the show's history would be known and accessed going forward. If one episode could be removed for reasons related to the conduct of someone associated with it, what were the criteria for similar decisions about other episodes? What was the threshold? Who made the call? These questions were not answered publicly. No comprehensive framework was established for thinking about them. The decision was presented as a specific response to specific circumstances, not as the articulation of a general policy, which left the questions open for every subsequent situation that might seem analogous. There were, in the years following that decision, quiet internal discussions about other episodes in the archive that contained material that was experienced differently in the present than it had been at the time of production. Several episodes from the 90s and early 2000s depicted characters from specific racial and ethnic groups in ways that reflected the casual assumptions about representation that were standard in American television comedy at the time, and that read very differently through contemporary eyes. The question of what, if anything, to do about these episodes was handled with significant caution. Some episodes had material removed in their digital streaming versions that remained intact in DVD releases. This created a situation in which different versions of the same episode existed simultaneously in the show's archive, with cuts that depended on the platform you were watching. A viewer who owned the DVD and a viewer who was streaming the same episode were watching slightly different things without necessarily knowing it. The show's archive had become quietly stratified in ways that were not publicized. The Apu controversy represents a separate track of the same underlying conversation about representation, one that unfolded over several years, and ended not with the removal of an episode but with the effective retirement of a character. Apu Nahasapi Mapetalan had been a presence in the show since its earliest seasons, voiced by Hank Azaria in a comedic Indian accent, and for decades was understood as a mostly benign element of Springfield's population. He was, within the terms of the show's world, a character with specificity and complexity. Educated, competent, embedded in his community, navigating his immigrant identity with a kind of determined cheerfulness. But for South Asian American viewers, the character had a different history. The accent, the visual characterization, the specific jokes built around Apu's Indianness, had been used as material for mockery in school hallways and social contexts in ways that were painful and cumulative. The character had become, for many South Asian American people, a symbol of the specific kind of representation that feels like visibility and functions like ridicule. The 2017 documentary, The Problem with Apu, made by comedian and writer Hari Kondabolu, brought these concerns into broad, mainstream cultural conversation for the first time. The documentary featured interviews with numerous South Asian American artists and cultural figures discussing the specific ways the character had affected their experiences of being South Asian in America. It was not a polemic. It was a thoughtful and specific examination of how representation functions in culture and what the consequences are when it is built on caricature, however well-meaning. The show's response to the documentary was, by the assessment of many critics and by Kondabolu himself, inadequate. A season 29 episode addressed the controversy directly by having Lisa break the fourth wall and speak about the show's problem in a way that acknowledged the critique while simultaneously deflecting it, framing the situation as one that the show did not know how to resolve. This meta-acknowledgement was read by many viewers as a sophisticated way of addressing the criticism without actually changing anything. You acknowledge the problem, you frame it as impossibly complex, and you continue. What followed was a gradual and unannounced diminishment of Apu's presence in the show. He appeared less frequently. His storylines became smaller. Then, in 2020, Hank Azaria announced that he was stepping away from the role. He followed this announcement with what he described as a personal process of listening and learning from members of the South Asian American community, and eventually with direct apologies to individuals who had been affected by the characterization. The character did not formally cease to exist in the show's world. He continued to appear visually in crowd scenes, identifiable in background shots, drawn but silent, his voice absent from episodes where his image remained. This created a strange and somewhat haunting presence in the show's recent seasons. A character who is visible but mute, who occupies space without being heard, who is present in the background of a Springfield that no longer speaks for him. Earlier episodes in the archive, where Azaria's voice and accent were central to his characterization, remained entirely intact. The show's past and its present had become two different things, coexisting in the archive simultaneously without either canceling the other. There is also the category of episode that was pulled not because of any controversy about content or representation, but because of timing. American history has been marked by a series of acts of mass violence, and the show's producers and Fox's broadcast standards team have, on multiple occasions following these events, delayed or pulled from rotation episodes that contained content that felt inappropriate in their immediate aftermath. Episodes with gun violence as a plot point, episodes with crowd disasters, episodes whose comedy involved emergency response failures. These decisions were made quietly and with minimal public communication, and the episodes typically returned to broadcast rotation after a period of time had passed. The frequency with which this happened, and the cumulative number of episodes that had at some point been subject to this kind of temporary management is larger than most people realize. The Simpsons has been on the air long enough, and American culture has experienced enough moments of collective trauma that a meaningful percentage of the show's archive has been removed from circulation at some point for some period of time, for reasons unrelated to the episode's content as art. The archive is not seamless. It has gaps, some temporary and some permanent, created by the specific intersections of fiction and historical reality that are an inevitable consequence of producing comedy for 3.5 decades. There is also a category of modification to the archive that involves not removal but alteration. Several episodes that were produced with content that did not conform to subsequent broadcast standards, or that contained jokes that felt differently over time, were modified in their digital versions in ways that were not announced. Small cuts, adjusted audio, scenes trimmed by seconds rather than minutes. A viewer who remembered the original broadcast and watched the streaming version of the same episode might notice something slightly off, a rhythm interrupted, a joke that does not land with the same timing. The difference would be small enough to be uncertain. Was the episode always this way? Is this the version that aired? Are they the same? Often they are not exactly the same. The archive is a living document in ways that the show's public presentation as a complete historical record does not acknowledge. What exists in the streaming version of a Simpsons episode and what aired on a Thursday night in a specific year may be the same thing, or it may be close to the same thing, or it may be something that has been quietly adjusted without announcement to conform to considerations that did not exist when the episode was first produced. Springfield has always been a place where the official version of events and the actual version of events exist in tension. It turns out the show about Springfield has the same quality. Number. Section 4. The guest stars who changed the show. In the specific culture of American celebrity in the early to mid-1990s, a guest appearance on The Simpsons meant something that cannot be fully reconstructed for people who were not alive for it, or who were too young to experience it as adults. The show, in those years, was the dominant piece of American entertainment culture. Not dominant in the sense of having the highest ratings in every week, but dominant in the sense of being the thing that everyone was talking about, the show that shaped the week's cultural conversation. the piece of television you had to have seen and had an opinion about. Being asked to appear on The Simpsons was a specific kind of cultural validation. It meant the people who made the show, who were generally understood to have excellent judgment about what mattered in American culture, considered you interesting and relevant enough to incorporate into the world of Springfield. The show's guest appearances were curated in a way that reflected very specifically what the production considered to matter at a given moment. This dynamic reversed the usual power relationship between shows and celebrities. Normally, a show pursues celebrity guests because the celebrity's presence raises the show's profile. With The Simpsons in the 90s, the celebrity pursued the invitation because appearing on the show raised their profile. The show was the more culturally powerful party, and everyone involved understood this. Michael Jackson's involvement with the show across the Season 3 episode represents the most elaborate celebrity story in the show's history, and also one of the most complicated. His appearance was conducted under conditions of almost complete secrecy. Jackson performed his vocal role under the pseudonym John J. Smith and was not credited in the episode. The reasons for the secrecy were practical. Jackson was at the height of his fame, and the complexity of publicly associating his name with the episode would have created production and promotional challenges that the show chose to avoid. But the secrecy also added something to the episode, a quality of genuine surprise for viewers who watched it without knowing, a quality that was lost once the involvement became widely known. The episode itself captured something real about Jackson and about celebrity and about the peculiar loneliness of fame. The character he voiced was a man who claimed to be Michael Jackson but could not prove it, a man whose identity was doubted by everyone around him, a man who connected with Homer and Bart in ways that were genuine despite the uncertainty about who he actually was. There was something in the situation that Jackson, by all accounts, found resonant. The episode did not flatter him in the way celebrity appearances usually try to be flattering. It treated the idea of Michael Jackson as something complicated, something that existed in a strange space between the person and the myth, and that treatment was apparently something the actual Michael Jackson found worth participating in. Paul McCartney's appearance in the Season 4 episode Lisa the Vegetarian is the guest appearance with the most lasting structural consequence for the show, because McCartney attached a condition to his participation that the show agreed to and has honored for over 30 years. McCartney's condition was simple and specific. Lisa's decision to become a vegetarian at the end of the episode could not be reversed in subsequent episodes. He was not willing to participate in a storyline that would use vegetarianism for a comedic arc and then abandon it at the end without consequence. If Lisa became a vegetarian, she had to remain one. The show agreed. Lisa has been a vegetarian in every episode since Season 4. This is one of the genuinely rare examples of a permanent character change in the show's entire run, maintained consistently across hundreds of episodes and dozens of seasons. McCartney's condition, which was the kind of thing that a network executive might have rejected as an unacceptable creative constraint, was accepted and honored and proved to be not a constraint at all, but a genuine contribution to the character. Lisa's vegetarianism is now so fundamental to who she is that imagining her without it feels like imagining someone else entirely. Ringo Starr appeared in a Season 2 episode that required him to respond personally to fan mail sent by Marge, and his condition for participation was less ideological than McCartney's but no less specific. Starr wanted to be depicted as a genuinely kind and good-natured person, not as a celebrity parody or a joke at the expense of his legacy. He wanted his animated self to reflect something true about his actual character. The episode honored this request completely. The Ringo Starr appearance is one of the most quietly affectionate celebrity depictions in the show's history, and Starr has spoken warmly about the experience in interviews across subsequent decades. What almost no reporting on this appearance discussed at the time was the broader context of the relationship between the surviving Beatles in 1991 when the episode was produced. The various legal and financial relationships between these parties were in a complicated and sometimes adversarial state. Starr's decision to do a cheerful animated cameo on an American comedy show was his own decision to make, but it was a decision made in a context that was more charged than it appeared from the outside. The Aerosmith appearance in the third season is one that the band has had evolving public feelings about over the years. At the time, the episode seemed to go smoothly. Aerosmith appeared as animated versions of themselves, playing a concert in Springfield and befriending Bart. It was fun and commercially successful, and exactly the kind of guest appearance that benefited both the show and the band at a moment when Aerosmith was in the middle of their 90s commercial renaissance. But in subsequent interviews given by individual members of the band across various contexts, a more complicated relationship with the episode has emerged than the public presentation suggested at the time. Several members of the band have expressed, at different moments and in different degrees of directness, a kind of ambivalence about what the episode represents in retrospect. Not hostility, not resentment. Something more like an uncomfortable awareness that the episode, which felt at the time like a genuine creative collaboration, reads differently seen from a greater distance as a commercial moment dressed up as artistry. A brand extension for a band in a moment of commercial revival, wrapped in the credibility of the most critically respected animated show in American history. This feeling is not unique to Aerosmith among the show's early guest stars. It is a fairly common response among people who made appearances on the show in its golden period, when the combination of the show's cultural dominance and the earnest creative conversations that preceded most guest appearances made the experience feel more significant than a typical promotional vehicle. Several of those people have described, years later, a process of retrospective reclassification. Something that felt like art at the time turns out, seen from a distance, to also have been commerce. This is not a disqualifying revelation. Art and commerce are rarely fully separable in American entertainment. But the specific quality of the show's golden period, the way it convinced people that what they were doing was genuinely different from regular television, meant that the inevitable commercial reality underneath felt more like a betrayal to people who had been persuaded into idealism about the project. There is one guest appearance from the show's earlier seasons that has never been publicly identified, and there are several people who know about it who believe it should remain unidentified. The appearance involved a public figure whose private circumstances at the time of the recording were such that public disclosure of their involvement in the episode could have had serious personal consequences for them. The voice performance was used in the episode credited to a pseudonym. The real identity of the performer was known within the show's inner production circle and has remained there. The reason people who know about this believe it should stay private is not that the person did anything wrong or that their involvement was in any way problematic. It is that the condition of anonymity was the price of the person's willingness to participate, and honoring that condition feels like the right thing to do even decades later. This is, in its own small way, consistent with the show's broader history of providing cover for identities that needed protecting. Michael Jackson under a pseudonym. Writers who contributed uncredited material during various periods. The Korean animators whose work appeared without credit. The Simpsons has always been, partly, a show about people who are not quite who they present themselves as being. Its own production history contains identities that remain genuinely hidden, performing their parts from behind names that belong to someone else. Section 5. The Writers' Room Wars. There is a Conan O'Brien that almost did not exist. In the early 1990s, before the television hosting career and the late-night institutions and the devoted following he built, O'Brien was a 27-year-old comedy writer with a Harvard degree and a background in improvisational performance who had just been hired into the writing staff of The Simpsons in its third season. He was, by multiple accounts from people who worked alongside him in those years, genuinely exceptional. His natural facility with comedic structure, his speed at the table, his specific instinct for the kind of joke that was both absurd and emotionally true. These were qualities that distinguished him, even in a room that had been deliberately assembled to have an unusually high concentration of exceptionally talented people. O'Brien wrote or co-wrote several episodes during his 2 seasons on the show that remain among the most celebrated in the show's history. The episode Marge vs. the Monorail, which is regularly cited by fans and critics as one of the funniest half hours in the history of American television comedy, was his. He pitched it, wrote it, and the finished product had a quality of comic architecture that reflected genuine mastery of the specific form the show had developed. The ability to construct a half hour of escalating absurdity while maintaining the specific emotional stakes of the characters at the center of it. His departure from the show in 1993 is usually explained as a straightforward professional decision. He left to pursue a television hosting career, which led to his hosting Late Night on NBC. This is accurate. But people who were in the building during the period leading up to his departure describe a more complicated set of feelings. The show's writer's room was one of the most remarkable creative environments that had existed in American television. Leaving it was not a simple decision, even when the alternative was an extraordinary opportunity. Part of what made the decision complex was the specific culture of that particular room during those years. The intellectual competition was intense in a way that was both productive and exhausting. The people around the table were almost uniformly brilliant and were aware of being brilliant, engaged in a constant low-level demonstration of that brilliance through the quality of their pitches, their jokes, their story notes, their riffs on each other's ideas. The specific feeling of being in a room with that many highly capable people all working at the same problem was, by the accounts of people who experienced it, unlike almost anything else in their professional lives. It was also tiring in a way that accumulated over time. The specific tiredness of sustained intellectual performance, of always having to bring your best because anything less was immediately visible in a room full of people who were always bringing their best. The hosting opportunity offered a different relationship with creative work. One in which O'Brien would have more direct control, more personal expression, more of a direct line between his sensibility and what appeared on screen. The writer's room was a fundamentally collaborative environment where no single voice dominated, where the best joke in the room won regardless of who pitched it, where the finished episode was never entirely any one person's. What O'Brien was being offered was something more singular. He left. The show absorbed his departure, as it had absorbed other departures, by continuing to have enough talent in the room to keep doing what it was doing. But his leaving was part of a larger pattern of departure that defined the transition from the show's early seasons to its golden period and from its golden period to what came after. The showrunners who had run the production since the third season, Al Jean and Mike Reiss, left at the end of the fourth season to develop their own projects. Their departures were followed over the subsequent years by the departures of other writers who had been central to the show's creative identity: John Vitti, George Meyer, John Swartzwelder, Jay Kogan, Wallace Wolodarski. Each departure took with it something specific about the show's sensibility, and the accumulation of them across several years constituted a genuine transformation of the creative infrastructure of the production. The show passed through a succession of showrunners: David Merkin for seasons 5 and 6, Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein for seasons 7 and 8, Mike Scully for seasons 9 through 12. Each transition involved not just a change in who was running the room, but a change in the philosophy that governed what a good episode of the show was understood to be. The Homer's Enemy episode deserves extended discussion because it is the most explicit case of the show's writers engaging in a direct and self-aware conversation about the direction the show was taking. The episode introduces Frank Grimes, a man who has earned everything in his life through genuine effort and personal suffering. He comes to work at the nuclear plant and encounters Homer, who has achieved nothing through no effort whatsoever and yet has everything that Grimes has worked for and been denied. The episode is structured as a slow-burning horror story in which Grimes' sanity deteriorates in response to the fundamental irrationality of Homer's existence. The episode ends with Grimes having a complete breakdown, mimicking Homer's careless behavior and electrocuting himself to death. At Grimes' funeral, Homer falls asleep and dreams loudly, and the congregation laughs and the episode ends. There is no punchline that softens what has happened. Grimes is dead because he tried to take Homer's world seriously, and Homer cannot be taken seriously, and Springfield rewards not taking things seriously. The writers of this episode were, by the accounts of people who were in the room, articulating something they genuinely felt about the show's trajectory. The Homer who destroys Frank Grimes is Homer pushed past his human dimensions into pure cartoon invincibility. A man who can do anything and suffer nothing, for whom consequences are structurally impossible, who exists in a permanent state of grace that he has not earned and cannot lose. This was a Homer who was becoming more dominant in the show's storytelling as the writer's room changed. Grimes is the character who refuses to accept cartoon logic, and the show kills him for it. The point is made clearly. In Springfield, the people who insist on reality are the people who do not survive. The transition to Mike Scully's tenure as showrunner is the one that most clearly marks what fans describe as the show's creative decline, and it is also the transition that is most poorly understood from the outside. The creative philosophy that governed those seasons was different from what had come before, but it was a philosophy rather than an absence of one. It prioritized comedic escalation, surprise, the specific pleasure of a joke that goes further than you expected it to. It was less interested in character consistency as a constraint on comedy and more interested in character as a jumping-off point for whatever the episode needed. The problem with this philosophy, as the people who were most critical of it have articulated across numerous interviews over the years, was that the specific qualities that had made the show extraordinary were exactly the qualities being traded away. The show's emotional truth had always come from its commitment to character. Homer was funny and sometimes tragic because he was Homer, a specific and consistently realized person with specific limitations and specific capacities for love. When Homer did things because the plot needed him to do them rather than because Homer would actually do them, the character became lighter, more flexible, more available for any story the writers wanted to tell. And also, in a way that was subtle but cumulative, less real. The writers who left during or after the Scully era, and who have spoken publicly about their experience, describe a specific grief that is distinct from normal professional dissatisfaction. They had been part of something that was genuinely extraordinary. They had worked in a room where the standard for what counted as acceptable was so high that things that would have been the best moment in almost any other show did not make the cut. They had been part of building something they believed in, and they watched that thing change into something they did not believe in, gradually, through a series of small decisions that each seemed defensible and whose accumulation was damaging in ways that were only fully visible once enough time had passed. This experience, the specific grief of watching something you built become something you do not recognize, is one of the more poignant threads in the show's production history, and it is one that almost never gets the attention it deserves, because the public conversation about the show's quality tends to focus on the finished product rather than on the experiences of the people who made it. Number section 6. The merchandise nobody talks about. In early 1990, somewhere in the manufacturing process that was churning out Simpsons merchandise at a rate that was trying to keep pace with a demand that nobody had fully anticipated, a product was made that should not have been made the way it was made. The specific product is not important to name. What is important is that there were enough of them made and distributed through enough retail channels that the process of finding them all and pulling them back was expensive and complicated and quietly managed in a way that left almost no trace in the public record. The recall was successful. Nobody was harmed. The story appeared in trade publications with the specificity and brevity that trade publications give to product recalls. And then it was gone. The dolls ended up in landfills. A few escaped into the secondary market and eventually became collector's items. The broader public, watching the show and buying Bart Simpson merchandise in quantities that were generating billions of dollars in revenue, never heard about any of it. This small story is a window into the larger and stranger story of what happened when The Simpsons became a brand, not a creative property, not a show, a brand. An entity that existed in commerce independently of the creative work that had generated it, managed by people who were responsible for its commercial performance rather than its artistic integrity, applied to products and materials and contexts that the people who had created the underlying characters had varying degrees of control over and input into. The commercialization of the show began with remarkable speed. The Simpsons premiered in December 1989 and was a commercial hit almost immediately. By the time the second season was airing, the family was already appearing on products. By the end of the third season, the commercial footprint of the brand was enormous by any standard of comparison. The characters were on beach towels and backpacks and t-shirts and keychains and coffee mugs and Halloween costumes and video games and fast food promotional items in dozens of countries simultaneously. The speed of this expansion outpaced the infrastructure that was supposed to manage it. Licensing deals were made quickly to capture market demand before it could dissipate. Manufacturers were approved to produce products in quantity and at speed. The review processes that were supposed to ensure that licensed products were consistent with the show's creative standards were overwhelmed by the volume and velocity of the commercial activity. Matt Groening's public comments on the merchandise have been consistently measured across the decades, because he understood from early on that criticizing the commercial engine loudly would create problems he did not want to create. The show's existence depended on its commercial success. The commercial success depended in part on the merchandise revenue. Attacking the merchandise was attacking the foundation that the show's continuation rested on. He was not in a position to do that cleanly, and he was aware of the constraint. But in interviews spread across 30 years, a consistent concern emerges. The version of the characters that appeared on the merchandise was not the version of the characters that lived in the episodes. The merchandise Bart was attitude, Catchphrases: rebellious posture, a skateboard and sunglasses, and an expression of aggressive indifference. This Bart sold extremely well. He resonated with a specific cultural moment in early 90s America, when a version of adolescent defiance had enormous commercial appeal. He was what the market wanted. He was also, in significant ways, not the character from the show. The Bart from the show was a more complicated person. A boy who wanted to be loved and who had complicated feelings about a father who simultaneously frustrated and adored him. A kid whose mischief was the expression of a genuine creative intelligence that the structures around him did not know how to accommodate. A person who could be moved to genuine feeling by specific things, who had loyalties and fears and a private tenderness that he worked hard to conceal because displaying it felt dangerous. This Bart was not commercially transferable to a coffee mug. The qualities that made him real as a fictional character were exactly the qualities that did not compress into an image. What compressed was the surface, the hair and the attitude and the phrase. And the surface was what the merchandise sold. The gap between the merchandise version of the characters and the show version of the characters was not unique to The Simpsons. It is a structural feature of entertainment merchandising. Characters become products by being simplified into images, and simplification necessarily strips out the complexity that makes them worth caring about. But the gap felt particularly sharp with The Simpsons, because the show's most ardent defenders were precisely the people who cared about the character complexity, who were invested in the specific emotional truth of the show's best moments, who found the reduction of those characters to attitude images almost offensive. There were two product controversies that deserve specific attention because they reveal something about the show's relationship with its own brand at specific cultural moments. The first was a talking toy that spoke one of the characters' catchphrases, and that was produced and distributed without the kind of close review that might have caught the problem in advance. In the context of a series of congressional hearings that were happening in the early 90s about violence and inappropriate content in entertainment products aimed at children, a politician held up a Simpsons product during testimony and used it as an example of entertainment that was sending messages to children that were not appropriate. The specific catchphrase cited was, by any reasonable assessment, entirely mild. But the political context was one in which entertainment companies were under significant pressure to demonstrate seriousness about their impact on children. Fox's response was not to defend the product. Fox's response was to quietly ensure that the product was discontinued. The toy disappeared from shelves without announcement or explanation. The congressional testimony had created a small but real moment of political risk, and the efficient commercial management of that risk was to remove the specific object that had created it and move on. What this small episode revealed was the show's vulnerability to a specific kind of political pressure that it could not easily defend against, because the show was simultaneously committed to a satirical identity that involved challenging authority and operating within a commercial structure that was dependent on the goodwill of the regulatory and retail environment that authority governed. The Simpsons had always taken satirical aim at the kind of political authority that was now targeting one of its products. But the commercial infrastructure of the show required that targets not shoot back in ways that affected the retail environment. The second merchandise controversy was more sustained and had longer-term effects on the show's brand management. A licensing deal for a fast food promotional tie-in was arranged in the mid-90s that seemed straightforward at the point of negotiation. The tie-in involved toys depicting the family in specific visual contexts. These were reviewed and approved through the standard licensing process, which was designed with the American market primarily in mind. When the promotion went international, the specific visual representations of the characters encountered cultural contexts in specific markets where they were received in ways that had not been anticipated. The specifics of what exactly was problematic in which markets have never been publicly disclosed, because the NDA structures of the licensing agreements ensured that the parties involved had strong incentives not to discuss it publicly, and the specific cultural sensitivities involved were delicate enough that no one with knowledge of them was eager to publicize the details. What is known is that the promotional required market-by-market management that was expensive and complicated. Some markets received modified products. Some markets had the promotion withdrawn entirely. The fast food company's relationship with the Simpsons brand cooled noticeably in the aftermath, and the licensing review process for future international promotions was significantly tightened. There is also the collector community around what is known in certain circles as bootleg Simpsons merchandise. the world of unauthorized and poorly licensed material from the early 90s that reproduced the characters with varying degrees of fidelity to the originals. Some of this material is so far from the source that the characters are nearly unrecognizable. Homer's head is the wrong shape. Bart's proportions are off in ways that make him look like a different kind of creature entirely. The colors are wrong. The expressions are wrong. Something has been translated badly through the process of reproduction, producing a character who is recognizably related to the original, but who also, in some specific quality, has become something else. People who collect this material are chasing something specific in its wrongness. The bootleg Bart, with his slightly malformed head and his off-brand colors, has a quality of wrongness that is almost more interesting than the correct version. It is the character filtered through a process that did not fully understand what it was reproducing, and the result is something uncanny and strange. A Bart who exists at the edge of being Bart, close enough to recognize but far enough to unsettle. This is, in its own strange way, a Simpsons product. Not the one the production intended. Not the one the licensing agreements governed. But a product of the same creative material passed through a different kind of process, emerging as something imperfect and alive in its imperfection. Something that Springfield, with its slightly wrong proportions and its impossible geography, and its residents who look almost human but not quite, might have recognized as its own. Number. Section 7. The Real Springfields. There are 33 incorporated places named Springfield in the United States. They are located in states ranging from Massachusetts to Oregon, distributed across the country with the geography of a very common name, applied independently by many different groups of settlers, who all found themselves standing next to springs and open fields and reaching for the most obvious word: available. When The Simpsons premiered and Springfield began its rise to being the most famous fictional town in American entertainment, every one of those 33 real Springfields had to figure out what to do with the fact that their town's name had become a global cultural reference for municipal dysfunction, nuclear contamination, and a population too cognitively impaired to notice what was happening to them. This was not a comfortable position for most of them, even when it came with commercial opportunities. Most of the real Springfields took the path of least resistance, which was to lean into the association in ways that were commercially beneficial while managing the implications carefully. Springfield, Illinois, which is the state capital, put Simpsons merchandise in its tourist gift shops, while its tourism board worked hard to ensure that the primary association of the name in any visitor's mind was Abraham Lincoln rather than Homer Simpson. Springfield, Massachusetts, incorporated references to the show into certain commercial contexts while maintaining an emphasis on its own historical and cultural identity in civic communications. The Oregon city that Matt Groening eventually confirmed as the inspiration for the show's Springfield had a more complicated public response. The confirmation came in a 2012 interview in Smithsonian Magazine, in which Groening explained that he had grown up near Springfield, Oregon, and had chosen the name partly for personal reasons and partly because it was common enough to feel universal. For the Oregon city, this acknowledgement created an opportunity and a problem simultaneously. The opportunity was clear. Springfield, Oregon now had a legitimate claim to a meaningful piece of American cultural history. The connection to the show's creator was genuine, confirmed by the creator himself, and represented a kind of cultural significance that most small cities never acquire. Tourism officials recognized this and acted accordingly. The problem was less obvious, but no less real. The Springfield of the show is a town defined by failure, a failing infrastructure, a corrupt power monopoly, an educational system that chronically fails its students, a civic culture that manages its own dysfunction through collective denial. People who actually live in Springfield, Oregon had varying reactions to the confirmation that their city had inspired all of this. Many found it delightful, a piece of cultural serendipity that brought attention to their community in a way that was mostly benign and commercially useful. But there were also residents who found the association uncomfortable, who felt that the public confirmation of the connection implied something about their actual city that was not fair and that they had not consented to. These concerns were expressed primarily in local contexts. Letters to newspapers, comments at town meetings, conversations in restaurants and barbershops. They received minimal coverage outside the immediate area because they were local in scale and because the broader public narrative around the Groening confirmation was enthusiastically positive. But they were real, and they came from real people who had to live in a town whose name had become synonymous with a particular kind of American civic dysfunction. Springfield, Illinois had the most acute version of this problem, because Illinois' Springfield had the strongest pre-existing civic identity and the most to lose if the association with the show became its primary cultural meaning. The city's tourism brand was built around Lincoln, around a specific and carefully cultivated identity as the home of one of America's most revered presidents. The show's Springfield, with its corrupt billionaire and its incompetent government and its repeatedly flooded infrastructure, was not a brand that Lincoln's Springfield wanted to be conflated with. There was one specific incident that created a brief formal diplomatic complication between the city and the show's producers. An episode from the show's middle period referenced the state of Illinois in a context that the city's then mayor found unflattering. The mayor's office sent a letter to Fox requesting that future episodes avoid specific characterizations that could be read as criticism of real cities in Illinois that bore the Springfield name. The letter was received, acknowledged, and filed. The show's response was polite and non-committal, because the show's creative approach was not something that was going to be adjusted to manage the sensitivities of individual cities. But the letter exists. It is in the public record of the city's official communications. A real American city writing formally to a television network to request that its fictional counterpart treat the city's name with more care. There is something perfect in this. Something very American. Something that Springfield itself would understand. The official response to an uncomfortable truth, lodged in the correct administrative channel, acknowledged politely, and changed nothing. The fan pilgrimage culture that has developed around the show adds a layer to this geography that is stranger and more touching than the legal and commercial dimensions. People who love the show deeply have, over decades, developed practices around visiting places that have connections to the production. This includes visits to Portland, Oregon, where street names match the streets in Springfield, because Groening used real Portland street names as the basis for Springfield's geography. It includes pilgrimages to each of the 33 real Springfields by people who want to stand in a place that shares a name with the place they have been dreaming about. The pilgrims who walk Portland streets looking for the Springfield addresses describe the experience as a particular quality of recognition that is also displacement. The streets are real. The names are there. Springfield Avenue, Lovejoy Street, Flanders, Quimby, Kearney. The names are exactly right. The streets are Portland streets. They are both of these things simultaneously. The pilgrim is standing in the place that partly inspired the fictional place, finding traces of fiction in the physical world, and the experience of this is something for which there is not quite a word. Close to nostalgia, but not exactly nostalgia. Close to recognition, but not exactly recognition. Something that happens when fiction has been real enough for long enough that the distinction between finding fiction in reality and finding reality in fiction becomes uncertain. The show created a place that does not exist and scattered pieces of real places throughout it. Real street names, real geographic features, real architectural details, real civic institutions given new names. The pilgrim who finds those pieces in Portland or in Springfield, Oregon, or in Springfield, Illinois, is finding something that is genuinely there, a real trace of a fictional thing embedded in the physical world. The fictional Springfield is distributed across real American space in fragments. You cannot find the whole thing anywhere, but you can find pieces of it in many places if you know what you are looking for. Number. Section 8. The episodes built from real pain. The best episodes of The Simpsons are the ones where the comedy and the sadness are genuinely intertwined. The ones where you cannot clearly separate what is funny from what hurts, where the laughter and the grief are not sequential but simultaneous, where the joke is both the release valve and the delivery mechanism for a feeling that needed to be felt. This quality is what people mean when they say the show used to be different, used to be more, used to matter in a way that was specific and irreplaceable. What many people do not know is that some of the episodes most celebrated for this quality were written by people drawing directly from personal experiences of grief, failure, and love that they brought into the writer's room and translated into the characters of Springfield, with only the thinnest fictional distance between the real source and the finished scene. The death of Maud Flanders in the season 11 episode Alone Again, Natura Diddley, is one of the most discussed creative decisions in the show's history, and the discussion has always centered on two things: the abruptness of Maud's death, which was generally considered poorly handled, and the reasons behind the decision to kill the character, which were eventually disclosed publicly. Maud was voiced by Maggie Roswell, who had been providing the character's voice since the show's early seasons. Roswell lived in Denver and had been flying to Los Angeles for recording sessions. When the production declined to continue reimbursing her travel costs, a decision made on financial grounds, Roswell left the production. The character of Maude was written out in response. The method chosen was to kill her. The writers who were assigned to write the death knew the situation they were working in. They knew that a character who had been part of the show's world for a decade was being killed because of a disagreement about travel expenses. They knew that Ned Flanders, one of the show's most beloved characters, was about to lose his wife to an accounting decision. The execution of the death reflected this knowledge in ways that were probably not conscious, but were visible in the finished product. The death is anticlimactic. It happens early in the episode. It is caused by a slapstick accident involving a t-shirt cannon, which is a joke setup but not delivered as a joke. It falls between two registers and lands in neither. The scene has the quality of something that needed to happen but that nobody wanted to write, executed by people who had been asked to do something they could not quite commit to. Years later, Roswell and the production reconciled. She returned to voice Maude in flashback episodes. But Maude remained dead in the present tense of the show, a permanent absence generated by a temporary financial disagreement. And Ned's subsequent storylines, his widowhood and grief, and eventual remarriage, became some of the most emotionally rich material the show produced in its later years. The circumstances that created Ned's grief were completely cynical. The grief itself, the character's grief, and the audience's response to it was completely real. Those two things coexist in the archive without resolution, which is perhaps the most honest thing about the whole situation. The Season 6 episode, And Maggie Makes 3, was written from a place of genuine feeling about fatherhood and sacrifice, and the specific quality of love that is expressed not through grand gestures but through quiet, daily, undramatic choices. The episode depicts Homer's discovery that Marge is pregnant for a third time, which requires him to give up his dream job at a bowling alley and return to the nuclear plant that he hates, working for a man who immediately rehangs the demeaning sign that Homer had removed during his brief period of happiness. The emotional weight of the episode rests on a single image. Homer, who has returned to the plant and to Burns's cruelty, has dealt with the degrading sign by covering parts of it with photos of Maggie, so that what remains readable is, "Do it for her." The image of Homer making meaning from what was designed to be humiliating, finding love inside a container built for contempt, is one of the most quietly devastating things in the show's entire archive. The episode's writer brought specific personal experience of early parenthood and the specific emotional algebra of choosing your children's welfare over your own desires. The emotional truth of the final scene is only available to someone who understands the specific feeling from the inside. The feeling of choosing to be somewhere you do not want to be because the alternative is unacceptable to someone you love more than you love your own preferences. The scene works because the feeling behind it is real, and the writer knew it from experience. The episode is also, in a way that has rarely been noted, one of the most conventionally moral statements the show ever made. Homer does not find a creative solution. He does not negotiate a third option. He accepts the constraint of his circumstances and finds meaning within the acceptance. The show, which spent most of its time satirizing conventional American values and institutional authority, here made a case for a very traditional understanding of parental love. You sacrifice not dramatically, not heroically, but quietly and repeatedly, because that is what love requires. The case is persuasive because it is made from experience rather than ideology. The second season episode, Bart Gets an F, is one that the show's retrospectives rarely highlight, probably because it is from a period before the show had fully developed the reputation for emotional depth that its later critical reception emphasized. But for viewers who encountered it as children, it is often the episode they describe as the first time a television show made them feel that what they were seeing was about them, about something real in their own experience. The premise is that Bart faces failing the 4th grade. He has to pass a history test or repeat the year. He fails the test and, in a scene that the show does not cut away from, he breaks down completely. He sits at his desk and cries with the specific quality of a child who has been trying as hard as they know how to try and has still fallen short. The show allows this to last long enough to be uncomfortable in the way that watching someone cry in a way they would not want to be watched is always uncomfortable. What follows is a small miracle. Snow falls outside the window. School is canceled. Bart gets one more day to study. And in his joy, he inadvertently demonstrates knowledge of a historical fact that counts as his test. He passes, by accident, by grace, by the specific luck that sometimes arrives after effort has been genuinely spent. The show trusted its audience, an audience that included many children who were Bart's age or close to it, to hold the failure and the relief simultaneously, to feel both without being protected from either by a punchline that came too early. This was, in 1990, unusual for children's entertainment. And it worked, because it was true to something real about what it feels like to try hard and fall short, and then be given a reprieve that you have not technically earned, but that feels, in the moment, like the world deciding to be kind. These episodes, built from real pain and real experience, are scattered throughout the show's archive like pressure points. You can find them if you know what you are looking for. They have a different texture than the episodes around them. The comedy is present, but it has weight. The characters feel, briefly, like people rather than drawings. The show's usual comfortable distance collapses slightly, and something more vulnerable comes through. They are the episodes that people mean when they say The Simpsons used to be something different. Something that could make you laugh and also make you feel the thing underneath the laughter, the thing that needed the laughter to make it bearable. Number section 9, The Animation Secrets. The opening sequence of The Simpsons, in its original form, runs approximately 60 seconds. It begins with the clouds above Springfield and descends through the town, catching glimpses of the family members going about their separate days before they converge simultaneously on the couch in the living room. The sequence was designed by Matt Groening and the show's early directors as a rapid visual introduction to the world of the show. This is the town, these are the people, this is how the family works. What the sequence also contains, distributed across its 60 seconds in ways that were not publicly acknowledged for many years, is a set of visual details that were placed there deliberately by the production's overseas animation team, and that encode, in the specific language of animation craft, a set of references and in-jokes that were never intended for casual viewers. The animation of The Simpsons, from the earliest seasons, was produced primarily in South Korea through a company called ACOM Production. The arrangement was the standard one for American television animation of the period. The creative work of design, storyboarding, and voice recording happened in Los Angeles, and the labor-intensive frame-by-frame drawing was handled by Korean artists working at a fraction of the American labor cost. This was true of most American animated television of the era. It was standard. It was economical. And it was, for the Korean animators involved, an opportunity to work on a production that they were aware had a level of cultural significance that most of their other work did not. The Korean animation teams who worked on The Simpsons were highly skilled professionals who were brought into extensive contact with the show's visual vocabulary through the work of reproducing it episode after episode across many years. They knew the characters better, in some specific technical sense, than almost anyone in the production. They had drawn Homer's hand hundreds of thousands of times. They had drawn Springfield's skyline from every angle. They had internalized the specific style rules of the show, which lines could be simplified, which proportions were fixed, which elements of the character designs were flexible in motion, and which were not through sheer volume of practice. And they used this knowledge, in specific episodes and across specific frames, to embed material in the animation that went beyond what was specified in the storyboards and production documents they received from Los Angeles. Some of this material was straightforwardly playful, small visual jokes inserted into background details that would only be visible to a viewer pausing the tape frame by frame. Objects and background scenes arranged in configurations that spelled words or formed images. Background characters in crowd scenes given facial expressions or body language that commented on the foreground action in ways that were not scripted. But some of the embedded material was more pointed. The AKM team was aware that their work was not credited in the way that American animation work was credited. The standard practice of the industry placed the Korean animators in a different category of credit than the American creative team, a practice that was economically rational from the production's perspective, and that the Korean teams had limited leverage to challenge. Their response to this in some episodes was to leave a trace of themselves in the work itself. Visual signatures that a viewer who was looking carefully might notice, but that would not be obvious in ordinary viewing. These signatures take different forms in different episodes. In some cases, they are literal signatures, characters in crowd scenes who are drawn with specific facial features that correspond to the Korean animators' own faces, serving as a kind of presence in the work that the credit would have otherwise acknowledged. In other cases, they are references to Korean cultural material, objects or symbols that have specific meanings in Korean visual culture that an American viewer would not recognize, and that therefore pass unnoticed into the background of Springfield. The production in Los Angeles was aware that the ACOM teams were embedding material in the frames. The response was generally tolerant, because the material was not offensive, did not alter the character of the show, and would not be noticed by ordinary viewers. There was one episode, in the earlier seasons, where a piece of background material was discovered in the review process that was deemed problematic. The accounts vary on exactly what it depicted and was corrected before broadcast. But the general relationship between the production and the Korean team's insertion of extra scripted material was one of tolerance, punctuated by occasional negotiation rather than prohibition. The couch gag designed by John Kricfalusi, the creator of Ren and Stimpy, in 2014, represents a different category of animation secret. Kricfalusi is a controversial figure whose personal conduct came to light years after the couch gag aired in ways that are difficult to separate from his professional legacy, and the couch gag he made for The Simpsons exists in the archive, now in a context that is complicated by what subsequently became public about him. At the time of production, the couch gag was celebrated as a creative collaboration with one of the most influential figures in American television animation of the early 90s. Kricfalusi was given unusual creative freedom for the couch gag, more than any outside filmmaker who had contributed to the opening sequence before him, because his background and reputation were understood to guarantee a specific kind of anarchic quality that was different from the show's normal house style. The result was, and remains, one of the most visually distinctive couch gags in the show's history. It incorporates Kricfalusi's specific animation style in ways that make it immediately and identifiably his work. Homer in the Kricfalusi-designed couch gag does not look quite like Homer normally looks. He is bulging and rubbery, and his physical reality is different from the Springfield version, constructed according to aesthetic principles that are foreign to the show's usual visual vocabulary. He is Homer, filtered through a sensibility that was formed by different priorities and different artistic influences. What this means, in retrospect, is that the couch gag contains a kind of visual authorship that is distinct from the show's own. It is not Simpsons animation. It is Kricfalusi animation using the Simpsons characters as material. The characters appear to escape briefly from the show's visual rules into someone else's visual universe, and then return. The couch gag now sits in the archive in a different relationship to its creator's biography than it sat in when it was produced. Whether a viewer can or should separate the visual content of the gag from what is known about the person who made it is a question that has no universally satisfying answer. The gag is there, the knowledge is there. They coexist without resolving. The animation team in the show's most recent seasons has continued the tradition of embedding production-specific references in background details. The specific language of these references has changed as the people doing the embedding have changed, but the practice itself has persisted. Viewers who examine specific frames closely and frequently enough will find things they were not supposed to find. Not secrets in the sense of revelations. Secrets in the sense of small, private moments of communication. From the people who made the work to the people attentive enough to find them. Springfield's background, across 36 seasons, is densely layered with these moments. The street signs that reference real people from the production. The books on characters' bookshelves whose titles encode information about the episodes they appear in. The newspapers and background shots whose headlines, if you can read them, comment on the main story. The television screens and background sets playing what appear to be other shows from the same production universe. The show within the show within the show, distributed through the background of an image that most viewers are watching the foreground of. This is, in its own quiet way, the most direct expression of something that the show's makers have always been engaged in, making something that rewards different levels of attention differently. The casual viewer sees the foreground. The attentive viewer sees the background. The obsessive viewer sees the details embedded in the background. And the person who made the detail sees their own work in something that will be preserved indefinitely, hidden in plain sight in the background of a frame from an episode of a show that has been running since 1989. Number. Section 10. The finales that were written and hidden. Every season of The Simpsons was produced under the possibility that it would be the last one. Not always a strong possibility. not always an equal possibility from one year to the next. But the possibility was there, quiet and structural, a presence in the production's understanding of itself that shaped specific creative decisions in ways that the show's viewers were not aware of. This was a consequence of the show's unusual relationship with renewal. Network decisions about whether to continue the show were made through a process that involved negotiations between Fox, the production company, the studio, and the talent negotiations whose outcomes were not predetermined and whose delays and complications created periods of genuine uncertainty about whether the show would continue. During these periods, it was not irrational for the production to consider what it would do if the decision came back negative. The creative response to this uncertainty was to write material that could function as closure. The show's writers, at various points across the show's history, generated endings, complete endings, with the specific shape of narrative closure that were designed to be the show's conclusion if the conclusion came. These endings were not produced as full episodes in most cases. They existed at the level of script, outline, and, in some cases, rough storyboard. But they were real creative work, generated by real writers working from a real assessment of what the show owed its audience if the decision came to end it. The most developed of these hidden endings was generated in the mid-90s, during a contract negotiation period that the public experienced as a brief gap in renewal announcements. Within the production, the period was more tense than it appeared from outside. There were genuine internal discussions about the possibility that the contract situation would not resolve in a way that allowed the show to continue. And in response to this possibility, the show's writers generated a document that laid out what a series finale would look like. The document is not publicly available. It has been described in general terms by people who were in the production during that period. The description that has emerged across multiple accounts is that the finale concept involved not a dramatic revelation, but a quiet closure, a return to the emotional core of the show, the family on the couch, the specific quality of an ordinary evening that has become extraordinary through the act of paying attention to it. This is consistent with what the best episodes of the show had always understood about itself, that the extraordinary thing about The Simpsons was not that they had adventures, but that they were a family. That the show was, at its most honest, not about the plots, but about the specific quality of love between these specific people, with all its limitations and frustrations, and daily expressions of care that do not look like anything. A finale that ended with the family on the couch understood. What it would have said by ending there is that the point of everything that preceded it was the couch. The stability of returning to the same place with the same people. The repetition as love rather than inertia. The persistence of the family despite everything the plots had thrown at it. The show did not need this finale. The contract negotiations resolved. The show continued. The document was filed and the writers returned to producing episodes. But the existence of the document confirms something about the production's understanding of its own purpose. When the writers were asked to think about what a real ending would look like, this is where they went. Not to plot resolution, to the family, to the couch, to the image that has opened every episode for 36 years, made new by being the last one. There are also the smaller hidden endings, the alternate codas and variations and additional scenes that were written for specific episodes and not used, that exist in draft scripts and production notes, and in the memories of the writers who generated them. These are not as dramatic as the full finale concept. They are more like the alternative versions that any creative process generates, the paths not taken that crowd around the path that was. What is interesting about the alternate endings to specific episodes is what they reveal about the production's comfort with darker resolutions. The Simpsons, in its public form, is a comedy that resets. Problems are solved or abandoned. Consequences are temporary. The family persists. But the alternate endings that have been described by people who read or contributed to them are sometimes significantly darker than what aired. Episodes whose broadcast versions end in warmth or comedy had alternative versions that ended in something more genuinely ambiguous, or that allowed the emotional weight of the episode's premise to land without the softening that the final cut chose. The decision to soften, to choose the version that reset more cleanly, was not always made because the writers preferred the lighter version. It was sometimes made because the production's understanding of the show's relationship with its audience required that certain kinds of darkness be handled carefully, that the show not consistently reward viewers who came to it for comfort with something that did not offer comfort. The show was many things, but it was also for a certain portion of its audience, a reliable source of warmth in the specific form of a family that endured. Taking that away, even in a single episode's ending, felt like a breach of something that had not been formally agreed upon, but that was real nonetheless. The producers and the writers existed in an ongoing negotiation between the show's capacity for genuine darkness and its responsibility to the audience that needed it to be something other than dark. The hidden endings that chose the darker path were the show's private acknowledgement that it could go there. The broadcast endings were its choice not to, most of the time, for most of the audience, because the thing they needed was the couch and the family and the reset. But the darker versions exist in draft form. They are part of the show's internal archive. They represent the show as it might have been if different choices had been made, accumulating over 36 years into a parallel Springfield where things do not always reset, where the weight of what happens stays heavy, where the family endures but shows the marks of everything it has endured. That Springfield does not exist in broadcast form. It exists in the production's private record, in the memory of the people who wrote it and chose not to use it. It is the shadow version of the show you have been watching, close enough to recognize, different enough to be unsettling. Number. Section 11. The characters who vanished. The Simpsons has a complicated relationship with the people who gave its characters their voices, in a way that is different from the relationship between most television shows and their casts. Because the show is animated, the performers are not visible on screen. Their physical presence is entirely absent from the final product. What they contribute is their voice, their timing, their specific quality of presence that comes through in the performance even when the performer cannot be seen. And when those voices are gone, the absence is felt in a way that is harder to describe than the absence of an actor from a live-action show, but no less real. Phil Hartman's contributions to The Simpsons across 8 seasons were substantial enough that multiple people connected to the production have described him as the closest thing to an irreplaceable cast member that the show had in its early and golden periods. He voiced 2 characters who were recurring in a way that made them fixtures of the show's world. Troy McClure was the first of them, the has-been actor who appeared in informational films and cheap entertainment properties, whose catchphrase was a self-introduction that cataloged his increasingly forgotten credits. McClure was a specific and detailed parody of a specific kind of show business figure, the person whose career had peaked, who still moved through the entertainment world with a confidence that was either valiant or delusional, or both, who inhabited the margins of Springfield's cultural life with an authority that was entirely self-generated. Hartman's performance of McClure was a masterwork of precise tonal control. He understood the character in a way that made him funny without being contemptible, human without being pathetic, ridiculous without being cruel. There was a warmth in Hartman's reading of even McClure's most self-aggrandizing moments that protected the character from the easy contempt that a lesser performer might have produced. Lionel Hutz, the second recurring character, was the ambulance-chasing lawyer whose incompetence was so thorough that it crossed into something almost philosophical. A man so completely wrong for his profession that his existence there required some explanation that the show deliberately never provided. Hartman's Hutz was even more precisely calibrated than his McClure. The character existed in a space where the comedy of incompetence was always balanced against a genuine quality of need, a man who required work badly enough that he accepted cases that a competent attorney would refuse, whose desperation was visible under the bravado in every scene. Hartman died in May 1998, murdered by his wife, who then turned the gun on herself, and both characters died with him. The production made the decision quickly and without extensive public deliberation. Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz would not be recast. They would be retired from the show. They would continue to exist in the archive of the earlier seasons but would not appear in new episodes. This decision was made out of respect for Hartman and for the specific quality of the characters, which was understood to be inseparable from his particular vocal performance. The decision was right. It was also genuinely expensive for the show, because both characters had been used flexibly as narrative tools that could be deployed in many different kinds of episodes. Their absence created a structural gap in the show's ability to tell certain kinds of stories. The production developed new recurring characters to partially fill the space. But the specific way that Hartman had inhabited those roles, the specific qualities he brought that made the characters what they were, was not recovered. It could not be. He was gone. Marcia Wallace voiced Edna Krabappel, Bart's 4th-grade teacher, for 23 seasons. The character was, in many ways, the most honest portrait of a specific kind of adult, that the show produced. A person who had expected more from their life, who had arrived at middle age having had most of their hopes disappointed, who managed this disappointment through a combination of sardonic humor and a genuine commitment to the work of teaching despite the conditions under which she was required to do it. Edna was tired. She was also good at her job. She was also, when the show allowed it, capable of genuine feeling that broke through the protective irony she wore as armor. Wallace died in October 2013, and the production responded by retiring the character from the show's present tense while honoring her in two ways. First, an episode that aired after Wallace's death contained, over a simple image of Bart having written, "We'll miss you, Mrs. K" on the classroom blackboard, a message to the audience that was also a tribute to the performer. It was quiet and direct, and it was the right decision. Second, the show incorporated Ned Flanders' marriage to Edna in the canon before her death, which meant that when the character was retired, Ned was a widower for the second time. His grief for Maude and his grief for Edna became part of the same storyline. A man who had been required to experience the loss of the people he loved in ways that would have destroyed someone less committed to the belief that meaning could be found in endurance. The retirement of these two characters and the method of retirement in each case, which was to honor the performer rather than recast or write the character out in a plot, reflects something about the show's understanding of the relationship between the performers and the roles. The characters were not separable from the performers in a way that allowed them to be handed to someone else. They were made of specific voices, specific rhythms, specific ways of moving through a line. They were performances. And when the performer was gone, the performance was gone with them. The archive preserves what existed. You can watch Phil Hartman's Troy McClure in the Springfield Film Festival episode and hear the specific quality of what he did with that character. The particular mixture of grandeur and self-awareness, the line reading that made you feel simultaneously that you were watching a joke and that you were watching something more. You can watch Marcia Wallace's Edna in the episodes where the character was given space to be more than her sardonic surface, where the show let her be full of feeling as well as exhaustion. These characters are there in the archive, completely present, voices intact, and they are, at the same time, not in the show anymore. The archive and the current show have different populations. People who are gone in life are present in the archive. Springfield continues around their absence while they continue to be fully alive in the episodes that predate it. This is, in miniature, the same relationship the show has with time more broadly. The Springfield of 1993 is a different population than the Springfield of 2025, but both exist simultaneously in the archive. The characters who have been retired, the performers who are no longer alive, the versions of the show that reflected a moment that no longer exists, they are all there, perfectly preserved, coexisting with the present version of the production in a way that makes the show's archive feel less like a record and more like a kind of preserved space where different times exist simultaneously and all of them are equally real. Number extended. The couch gag as confession. There is a couch gag from season 25 that most viewers processed as an absurdist joke and moved on from. In it, the opening sequence plays as normal until the family arrives at the couch, at which point the camera pulls back to reveal that we are watching the show on a television, and the camera continues to pull back, revealing that the television is in a room, and the room is in a house, and the house is in Springfield, and Springfield is inside a snow globe, and the snow globe is on a shelf, and the shelf is in a shop, and the shop closes and everything goes dark. Most people found this funny. A few people found it clever. Nobody talked much about what it said. The snow globe image is one of the most familiar visual metaphors for a self-contained world that exists for the pleasure of an observer outside it. Springfield, the shot is telling you, is exactly that, a perfect, tiny world, shaken occasionally for the pleasure of watching the pieces settle. The people inside do not know they are in the snow globe. They cannot see the shelf, the shop, the larger world that contains them. They cannot see you, watching from outside. The shot holds on the darkened shop for a moment longer than the punchline requires. The lights are off. The snow globe sits on its shelf. The town inside it continues, invisible in the dark. And the question that the shot does not quite ask but that it makes available to anyone who is paying attention is, what happens to Springfield when no one is watching? What is the town like in the dark, when the observer has gone and the snow globe has stopped being observed? The answer that the show implies, structurally, by its own mechanics is exactly the same. Springfield exists independently of being watched. because it has to exist independently of being watched in order for the watching to matter. The characters are not performing for the camera, they are living their lives and the camera is observing. The snow globe does not create the town inside it. It just makes the town accessible to an external viewer. When the shop goes dark and the viewer goes away, Springfield continues. Homer goes to bed. Marge worries about something. Bart sleeps with one arm hanging off the mattress in the specific position of a person who is completely at ease in their body. Lisa's saxophone is on her desk, waiting. Maggie is awake in the dark, watching the ceiling, thinking whatever it is she thinks. This is what the show has always understood about itself. That it is depicting something that exists, that the characters have an interior life, that the episodes only partially reveal, that Springfield continues beyond the frame in ways that the frame cannot show, but that the best episodes allow you to feel. The couch gag is not a trick. It is an honest statement about the relationship between the show and its subject. And when the lights go out in the shop, when the season ends and the archive closes for the summer, Springfield is still there, waiting in its snow globe for the next time someone picks it up. The contrast between this couch gag and the one that John Kricfalusi designed could not be more complete. Where the snow globe gag is quiet and philosophical and slightly melancholy, the Kricfalusi gag is loud and anarchic and physically aggressive in its imagery, characters deforming and exploding and reassembling with a violence that is played as comedy but that has a quality of genuine threat. The difference between the two versions of Springfield, the town as contemplated snow globe versus the town as subject of anarchic physical comedy, reflects not just different aesthetic philosophies, but different understandings of what the show's relationship with its own characters is. In one version, the characters are fragile and precious. The show holds them carefully. It knows they could be broken. In the other version, the characters are indestructible by definition. They can be put through anything and will reconstitute. The violence is consequence-free by design. Both of these are true about The Simpsons. Both versions of the couch gag are honest about different aspects of the show. That is part of what makes the gag, across its hundreds of iterations, such a precise instrument for taking the show's temperature. It is the one moment where the production can speak directly about itself without speaking directly, where the show can show you how it feels about what it is, using the specific visual vocabulary of its most iconic recurring image. The couch gag has also, in certain seasons, functioned as a kind of memorial. When cast members died, or when the show wanted to mark an ending that the regular episode structure did not have room to acknowledge, the couch gag offered a space for quiet tribute. These memorial couch gags are among the most tender things in the show's history, small, specific acts of acknowledgement that the production chose to place in the opening sequence rather than in the episode itself, which meant that every viewer who watched that week would encounter the tribute without choosing to, before the episode had even begun. This is the couch gag as institutional memory. The show marking its own losses in the one consistent space that has persisted through every change in cast and crew and creative direction. The couch itself, which has been depicted in hundreds of different configurations and contexts over the years, functions as the fixed point around which the show's history organizes itself. Everything the show has been and lost and mourned has gathered, at some point, in the image of a couch. Number, extended, the Second Contract War. Nobody covered correctly. The reporting on the 1,998 salary dispute was extensive and generally accurate about the facts. The cast demanded raises. Fox resisted. The cast united. Fox threatened recasting. An agreement was reached. The cast received substantial raises. The show continued. What the reporting almost universally missed was the specific dynamics within the cast's negotiating unity, because those dynamics were much more complicated than the image of a unified front suggested. The 6 principal voice actors, Dan Castellaneta, Julie Kavner, Nancy Cartwright, Yeardley Smith, Harry Shearer, and Hank Azaria, had different contractual histories, different relationships with the production and with each other, different assessments of their own leverage, and different anxieties about the consequences of the negotiation going badly. Shearer, who voiced the largest number of distinct recurring characters of any cast member, had a specific leverage consideration that was different from the rest. His characters Burns, Smithers, Skinner, Ned Flanders, Lenny, Kent Brockman, and a long list of others were more diverse and more individually developed than those voiced by some of his colleagues, which meant that the practical difficulty of recasting him was greater, but it also meant that his personal risk calculation was different. A negotiation that resulted in his departure would have required the show to find ways to voice not one character, but a significant portion of its recurring cast. Azaria, who was at this point voicing Apu among many other characters, was in a contractual position that had developed differently from the original 6. His path to the main cast negotiations was through a process of gradual inclusion in the primary cast structure that had begun with supporting character work and expanded as his role in the show grew. The specific terms of his participation in the solidarity negotiations reflected this different history. What the reporting also missed was the degree to which the cast's unity was sustained not just by shared financial interest, but by a specific quality of relationship that had developed among these people across nearly a decade of working together in the recording studio. The process of recording a Simpsons episode involves the full cast reading through the script together at a table, a practice that is significantly different from the standard animation recording practice of recording each actor individually. This table read, which has been a consistent element of the production's process since the beginning, means that the cast experiences the creation of each episode together. They hear each other's performances. They respond to each other in real time. They have been engaged in this shared creative practice consistently for years that, by 1998, amounted to a substantial portion of their professional lives. The relationship this created was not simply professional. It was something more sustained and more intimate than professional relationships typically are, because the specific quality of the recording process required a kind of trust and responsiveness that you do not normally ask of people you only encounter in business contexts. They had been performing for and with each other in a very specific and vulnerable way, since before the show was a cultural institution. Their negotiations were conducted in the shadow of that history. This is why the recasting threat, which Fox deployed as what was understood by all parties to be a negotiating tactic, landed with a specific quality of personal hurt that pure professional calculation does not fully explain. It was not only a threat to their income, it was a threat to replace them in a creative project with which they had a deep and personal relationship, to hand over the voices they had built and lived in to someone else, to continue without them. The financial and the personal were not separable in the calculus of how they experienced that threat. The resolution of the dispute, which gave the cast significantly higher per-episode fees without the profit participation they had sought, was understood by the cast as a partial victory. They had demonstrated the unity and the willingness to create real disruption. They had extracted real financial compensation. They had not gotten everything, but they had gotten something that validated the risk they had taken. The deeper consequence, which was not discussed in any of the reporting at the time, and which has only emerged in retrospective accounts given by people close to the production across subsequent years, was a permanent shift in the quality of trust between the talent and the network. Fox had been willing to credibly threaten to replace the cast of one of the most successful shows in the history of American television. The cast had been willing to credibly risk having that replacement happen. Both parties had demonstrated to each other that the financial and institutional dimensions of the relationship were capable of overriding other considerations. That demonstration was not forgotten. The production continued, the show continued, the relationships continued. But the context in which all of them continued had been altered by a period of weeks in which everyone involved had been required to look directly at the commercial machinery underneath the creative project and to see it with the usual comfortable obscuring layer removed. What the best episodes of the show have always understood is that the thing underneath the comedy, when you look at it directly, is never entirely comfortable. The couch gag lands every week, and the family assembles, and the episode plays, and everyone laughs. And the machinery that makes all of this happen is running throughout, invisible in the background, and it does not laugh. Number. Extended. What the banned episodes tell us about America. The pattern of episodes pulled from American broadcast after moments of national trauma reveals something specific about the relationship between American entertainment and American grief. It is not simply that the show's producers wanted to be sensitive. Sensitivity can be achieved in many ways. The choice of removal, temporary disappearance from the schedule, as the primary tool of sensitivity management is itself a statement. It says, these topics are too close to these events to coexist with entertainment in the same schedule. The implicit claim is that entertainment that touches certain subjects in certain ways creates a kind of interference with mourning or processing that is harmful. That comedy about violence, seen shortly after actual violence, does something to the viewer that straight comedy or unrelated entertainment does not. This belief has been contested at various points by people who argue that humor has always been one of the primary human mechanisms for processing trauma, that comedy about difficult subjects is not a disrespect to those subjects, but one of the most honest ways of engaging with them. The argument is reasonable and is supported by a significant tradition of human cultural practice. Tragedy and comedy have always been closer to each other than comfortable aesthetic categories prefer to acknowledge. The Greeks knew this. Shakespeare knew this. The Simpsons, in its best episodes, knew this. But the management of the show's schedule in the aftermath of traumatic events reflects a different understanding. That the audience's relationship with the show creates specific expectations that, when violated by bad timing, produce a reaction that is disproportionate to what the episode itself would generate in a neutral context. It is not that the content of the episode is offensive. It is that the experience of watching the episode in a specific temporal context, immediately after a specific kind of event, creates a dissonance that the audience experiences as a kind of betrayal. The show's producers understand this, which is why they have repeatedly made the same kind of decision, not to defend the content of the episodes, which could almost always be defended as legitimate creative work, but to manage the timing of their broadcast to reduce the chance of that dissonance occurring. What this management reveals is that the show's relationship with its audience is understood by its producers as a relationship with specific emotional expectations attached to it. The audience brings to The Simpsons not just a desire to be entertained, but a specific kind of trust. A belief that the show will provide a certain kind of experience, a reliable, warm comedy about a family they have known for a long time. When external events make it likely that a specific episode will violate that trust, not because of anything wrong with the episode, but because of what the audience is carrying when they sit down to watch it, the producers choose to protect the trust over the schedule. This is a meaningful decision. It says that the relationship is more important than any single episode. That the archive can wait, but the relationship cannot absorb repeated violations. That the audience's trust is an asset worth protecting through temporary self-censorship. It also says, implicitly, that the show understands its audience's emotional vulnerability in a way that most entertainment production machinery does not acknowledge. The show knows that its viewers come to it from lives that are sometimes very hard, and that the reliability and warmth the show provides are not trivial commodities. They matter. They are worth protecting. Even at the cost of pulling episodes. Even at the cost of gaps in the schedule where the show should have been. Springfield will always be there when it is safe to return. Number. Extended, the voice in the room recording practices. The specific acoustics of The Simpsons recording studio have never been formally documented. What has been described across many interviews given by cast members over the years is a sense of the room, its particular atmosphere, the way it felt to be in it at the beginning of a new episode, the quality of the work that happened there. The table read, as mentioned earlier, is a practice in which the full cast reads the script together before individual recording. This is unusual in animation production, which typically treats voice recording as individual work, each performer in their own session, the whole assembled later in editing. The choice to bring the cast together for the table read reflects a philosophy about performance that is itself interesting, a belief that the performances will be better, more responsive, more alive, if the performers have heard each other before they go into their individual sessions. What happens at the table read is something like a first sketch of the episode. The writers are in the room, the producers are in the room, the cast is hearing the script for the first time, reading the lines at their character's pace, discovering the beats and the places where the jokes land or do not land, finding in real time the moments where the writing works and the moments where it needs to be adjusted. Dan Castellaneta has described the specific discipline required to voice Homer at the table read, the choice between reading the line as written and allowing the character's rhythms to suggest something else, the awareness of the room's response and how it shapes the performance in the moment, the accumulation of years of embodying this character in a way that has made certain choices automatic and certain discoveries still possible. He has been Homer Simpson's voice for 36 years, which means he has been performing a version of this specific person, his specific rhythms, his specific emotional qualities, his specific way of moving through a joke for longer than many professional relationships last. Julie Kavner, who voices Marge, has spoken less frequently and less at length about the process than some of her colleagues, which is itself consistent with what she has described about her approach to the work. A preference for keeping the performance private until it is ready, a belief that articulating what you are doing is different from doing it, and not always helpful. What has come through in her rarer interviews is a sense that she finds the long duration of the project, the fact that she has been performing this specific character since before the show was formally a show, since it was a segment on a sketch comedy program, something that she does not analyze from the outside but inhabits from the inside. The specific texture of a voice changes across 36 years. The instrument that produces the voice changes. The performer's understanding of the character deepens and shifts. The character herself, while frozen in the show's visual representation, is being voiced by someone who is different in ways both visible and invisible from the person who first recorded those lines. The Marge of the current season is the Marge of Season 1, heard through 36 years of additional experience. The character does not show this. The performance carries it. This creates a strange relationship between the archive and the present. The Marge of Season 1, voiced by Kavner at whatever age she was then, and the Marge of the current season, voiced by Kavner now, are the same character. The continuity of the voice is the continuity of the character. But the voice is not the same voice. It is the same voice's continuation, carrying the same essential qualities while having changed in ways that are too fine-grained to notice episode by episode, but that would be unmistakable in direct comparison. Springfield does not age, the performers age, and through them, invisible in the finished product, the show ages. The accumulation of years in the voices, the specific weight of long practice and long commitment, is present in every line, heard without being heard, understood without being known, number, extended. The writers who never got credit. John Swartzwelder wrote 59 episodes of The Simpsons across the show's first 14 seasons. 59 is the number for one writer across roughly 14 seasons of television. This is a number that is difficult to fully process. The standard for a television comedy writer in that period was something like 3 to 5 episode credits per season if you were working steadily and productively. Swartzwelder's pace was more than twice the high end of that range in his most productive years. He is also the most private person who has ever had a significant creative role in the show's history. He gave no interviews during his time on the staff. He has given, in the decades since he left the show, a very small number of written interviews, conducted via email, in which he has discussed his work with a combination of genuine modesty and precise humor that is recognizable as the same sensibility that produced his best episodes. He has described in these interviews a working practice that was itself unusual, writing from home, submitting scripts, avoiding the office. He was paid for results. The results were consistently excellent. The specific quality of a Swartzwelder episode is recognizable to people who know his work, though not always in a way they can fully articulate. His episodes tend to be structurally confident in a way that allows the comedy to escalate without apparent effort, each development seeming inevitable in retrospect, though it could not have been predicted in advance. His jokes work on multiple levels simultaneously in a way that most comedy does not manage. And his episodes have a specific quality of warmth toward the characters that is present even in the episodes that put those characters through the most bizarre circumstances. What has almost never been publicly discussed is the degree to which Swartzwelder's specific and unusual working arrangements, his ability to work remotely before remote work, was a standard accommodation, his immunity to certain aspects of the writer's room culture that other staff navigated constantly, were a product of his value to the production, being understood clearly enough that the production was willing to accommodate conditions that would not have been offered to a less exceptional writer. The production needed his scripts. The scripts required his specific mind. His specific mind required conditions that were not standard. The production accepted the conditions to get the scripts. This is, in the specific mathematics of creative work and institutional accommodation, a fairly pure transaction. What it reveals is that the writer's room, for all its culture of mutual performance and competitive wit, was always capable of making space for a form of creative contribution that refused to fit that culture, when the contribution was valuable enough. Swartzwelder's subsequent career writing a series of self-published novels featuring a private detective has been received with quiet enthusiasm by the community of people who care deeply about his Simpsons work. The novels have his specific voice, his specific structural confidence, his specific quality of warmth toward characters who are simultaneously ridiculous and real. They are not widely known outside the community of his admirers, but they are there, available, for people who loved what he did with Homer and Marge and Bart and want more of the sensibility that produced those episodes. He received no credit in the show's public presentation beyond the episode credits themselves, no special acknowledgement of the exceptional quantity and quality of his contribution, no public celebration of the specific ways his work defined the show's golden period. The episodes he wrote are in the archive, carrying his name in the credit sequence, and that is the entirety of the monument. It is in some ways the appropriate monument. The episodes are the work. The work is what he did. He did not want the other kind of monument. He wanted to write his 59 episodes and leave the room and go home and write something else. The work speaks. The writer is quiet. Number. Extended. The languages of Springfield. The Simpsons airs in more than 50 countries. In most of them, it airs not with subtitles but with full dubbing. New voice actors, working in their own languages, performing the characters as they have come to exist in those languages across the decades of the show's international run. The Spanish-language Bart is not the American Bart. He is a translation, performed by a different person, shaped by different comic rhythms, carrying associations from Spanish-language comedy tradition rather than American comedy tradition. The German Homer has been voiced by the same German actor for 36 years, which means that for German viewers, there is a German Homer who is as familiar and as established in their relationship with the show as the American Homer is in the American relationship with the show. These are not inferior or supplementary versions of the characters. They are the characters as they exist for those audiences. They are as real to their viewers as the original performances are to American audiences. The show has 36 years of history in German, in French, in Spanish, in Japanese, in Portuguese, in Polish, and Czech and Hungarian, and every other language in which it has been broadcast. In each of those languages, the show developed differently. Different catchphrases caught on, different guest appearances resonated more or less, different episodes became the canonical touchstones for fans in different countries. The global Springfield is not one Springfield. It is dozens of Springfields, each adapted to the cultural context that receives it, each carrying slightly different associations and resonances and memories. The nuclear power plant and Burns and Homer and Bart are common to all of them. The specific language in which those characters exist, the specific joke rhythms and cultural references, and the way that Homer's stupidity or Burns's villainy reads in a given context is particular to each version. What this means for the show's legacy is that any account of what The Simpsons is or was or meant is necessarily partial. It is an account of the English language version, or of one of the dubbed versions, or of the way the show was received in a specific cultural context. The full account of what the show has meant in every country where it has aired simultaneously for 36 years is not the kind of thing that can be contained in any single telling. The show is the same show, and it is many shows. Springfield is the same town, and it is many towns. Homer is the same Homer, and he is many Homers. The archive that preserves the show is not one archive, but many archives, in many languages, each complete and each different. This is perhaps the most honest thing about the show's relationship with universality. It does not achieve universality by being the same thing everywhere. It achieves it by being adaptable enough to become many things without losing its essential nature. The couch always receives the family at the end of the opening. The power plant always looms over Springfield. Whatever language is being spoken around it, the specific structure of the show, its specific relationship between the everyday and the absurd, between the domestic and the satirical translates, not because language does not matter, but because the thing that translates is prior to language. It is structure, rhythm, the specific shape of a family whose love for each other is real and complicated and expressed imperfectly, and whose persistence, despite everything, is the show's fundamental argument about what endures. That argument does not need to be made in English to be understood. Number. Extended. The Simpsons and the American Middle Class. The show debuted at a specific economic moment in American history. December 1989 was the last winter of the Reagan era in its purest form. The economic expansion of the 1980s had generated enormous wealth for people positioned to participate in it, and had left others behind in ways that were beginning, in late 1989, to become impossible to ignore. The savings and loan crisis had materialized into something that required government intervention. The concept of the American middle class as a stable and self-perpetuating social category was beginning to fray at edges that had seemed secure a decade earlier. The Simpsons premiered into this moment as the most honest portrait of the American working-class family that mainstream American entertainment had ever produced. Homer's $400 per week salary at the nuclear plant was the specific salary of a specific kind of American life. Not poverty, not comfort, the specific material existence of a family that is always slightly behind and slightly worried about it, for whom a big unexpected expense is a genuine problem and a vacation requires real sacrifice. This economic specificity was not incidental to the show's comedy, it was the show's subject. The jokes about Homer's salary, about Marge's couponing, about the family's inability to afford things that their neighbors or cultural context made them feel they should afford, were not cheap shots at economic anxiety. They were precise observations about the specific texture of American working-class life in the specific historical moment of the show's debut. The show understood something about this life that most television comedy of the period did not. It understood that financial anxiety is not primarily dramatic, it is primarily ambient. It is the background condition of ordinary life, the thing that does not produce crises every week but that is present in every decision, every negotiation, every choice about what you can and cannot do. The Simpsons translated this ambient quality into comedy without betraying it, without making the anxiety cartoonishly large or dismissing it as trivial. The Simpsons family was worried about money the way actual American working-class families were worried about money, as a constant low-level hum underneath the specific events of daily life. This is also why the show's relationship with Burns has always functioned as more than cartoon villainy. Burns is not just a rich man who is also mean. He is the specific shape of concentrated wealth in a specific economic system. The man whose decisions ripple through the material conditions of every person in his orbit without his ever having to see those people as fully real. Homer works for Burns. Springfield's economy depends on the plant Burns owns. The food Marge buys at the grocery store is paid for by the wages Burns has chosen to pay for the labor Burns has chosen to keep at the minimum necessary level. The relationship between the Simpsons family and Burns is not a cartoon exaggeration of economic relationships in America. It is a fairly precise cartoon depiction of those relationships. The show's golden period writers were aware of this dimension of the show's subject matter in a way that is visible in the episodes they produced. The political and economic satire in those seasons is not decorative. It grows from the same soil as the emotional truth of the family's life. An understanding that the conditions in which the family exists are not arbitrary or natural but are produced by specific decisions made by specific people with specific interests, and that those decisions shape the texture of ordinary life in ways that are difficult to see because they are so ambient, so much the background rather than the foreground. As the show aged and its writers changed, this dimension of the show's subject matter became less central. Later seasons retained the nominal situation Homer, at the plant, Burns as the villain, the family's working-class context, but treated these elements increasingly as setting rather than subject. The plant became a backdrop for Homer's adventures, rather than the economic reality that structured his existence. Burns became a recurring antagonist rather than a systemic force. The show's political economy, which had been one of its sharpest tools, dulled. People who have tried to articulate what they miss about the show's earlier seasons without quite being able to name it are often missing this. The specific quality of economic honesty that made the comedy feel true. The sense that the jokes about Homer's work and Marge's budget and Bart's school and Lisa's frustrated ambitions were jokes about real conditions rather than jokes about cartoon conditions. The feeling that Springfield was a real place with real material stakes, and that what happened there mattered in the way that things matter when the consequences are actual. The show lost this, gradually, as the concerns that shaped its production changed. The writers who understood the economic texture from the inside, who had grown up in working-class contexts, or who had done the specific work of understanding those contexts, rather than observing them from a comfortable distance, were replaced by writers whose relationship with American economic life was different, and the show changed in response. The Homer who spends the first 4 seasons trying to manage the gap between what his family needs and what his paycheck provides, finding small strategies and small consolations and small victories within constraints he did not choose, is a different Homer from the Homer who goes to space and becomes a professional boxer. and runs for office, and meets every celebrity you can think of. The first Homer is true. He is the Homer of the show's subject. The second Homer is flexible, available for any plot, freed from the constraints that made the first Homer the specific person he was. This transformation is one of the most consequential changes in the show's history, and it is one that has received less sustained attention than the shift in joke structure or the changes in the writer's room, because economic honesty is less easy to articulate as a quality than punchline construction or character consistency. But it is there, visible to anyone who watches the early seasons and the later seasons in sequence. The first 4 or 5 seasons are about something, about a specific thing, a family, in a specific economic position, navigating a specific version of American life. After that, they are about anything, and anything, while technically more flexible, is also significantly less. Number, extended. Springfield's Dead, a guided tour. The Simpsons has killed a meaningful number of characters across its 36 seasons. Not in the treehouse of horror episodes, which are designated alternate universes where death is consequence-free almost by design. In regular canonical episodes. Characters who die and who remain dead, whose absence from subsequent episodes is the direct consequence of their deaths in earlier ones. The accumulated dead of Springfield represent a specific documentary record of the show's relationship with mortality across its history. The early seasons handled death with a specific kind of gravity, a genuine awareness that the death of a character in a comedy is a different kind of event than a death in a drama, that it requires specific handling to avoid being either exploitative or dismissive. The deaths in those seasons land with weight. They are events that characters respond to, and that episodes process with something close to honesty. Snowball the cat, the family's original pet, died in the earliest seasons and was replaced by Snowball 2. The show handled this death without fanfare. The cat was gone and a new cat appeared, and the show moved on, as families do move on, not dramatically but practically. The specific casualness of the replacement naming the new cat Snowball 2, acknowledging the continuity in the nomenclature rather than pretending the loss had not happened, is actually a more honest engagement with pet death than most family entertainment manages. Animals die. Families get new animals. They carry the memory of the old one in the name. The death of Frank Grimes in Season 8, discussed earlier in the context of the writer's room, is the death that the show has never quite absorbed. Grimes dies in the episode, and the show has never been able to fully move past the implications of his death, because those implications are too uncomfortable to fully acknowledge. The death says something about what Springfield is and what Homer is in that Springfield that the show cannot unsay. Every subsequent episode where Homer's carelessness has consequences that evaporate by the credits exists in the shadow of the episode where Homer's carelessness had a consequence that did not evaporate. Grimes is the ghost of the show's capacity for genuine consequence. The deaths of guest characters, who are often written into single episodes specifically to die, have a different texture. The show uses death as a story beat for guest characters in ways that it cannot use it for regular cast members, because the audience's investment in the guest character is limited and calibrated by the episode. These deaths can carry weight within the episode without accumulating into the ongoing narrative in ways that would force the show to address them consistently across seasons. Sideshow Bob's brother Cecil, played in a memorable episode by David Hyde Pierce, survives his appearance despite a situation that might have ended more darkly. This survival is interesting in retrospect precisely because it represents the show's choice at a fork, to kill the guest character or not. The choice not to kill him allows the possibility of return that the show has used across subsequent seasons. The architecture of the recurring villain is built on the choice not to resolve with death, to leave the story open, to preserve the possibility of more story in the same thread. This is one of the show's consistent policies, though it is never articulated as one. The recurring villain is more valuable than a satisfying conclusion. Sideshow Bob, who has returned across many seasons in increasingly elaborate plots, has never been definitively concluded because his definitive conclusion would be his death, and his death would end his availability as a story engine. He remains alive and imprisoned and periodically released because the story needs him more than justice needs him. Springfield's relationship with its own dead is one of strategic management. The people who needed to die for the story, to be honest, Grimes, Maude, Edna died. The people who are more useful alive remain alive in ways that the show's logic sometimes has to work fairly hard to justify. The moral architecture of this system reflects the show's ultimate commitments, not to moral consistency but to story. not to justice but to continued interest. This is, in Springfield terms, simply accurate. In Springfield terms, this is just how things work. The system is not designed to produce justice. It is designed to produce more Springfield. And Springfield, for all its dysfunction, continues. The dead are remembered or they are not. The living continue in whatever configuration the story requires. The show runs another week. Number, extended. Matt Groening's cameo history. Matt Groening has appeared in The Simpsons more times than most viewers realize. Not always visibly, not always by name, but consistently across the show's history, there are specific moments where the show's creator has allowed himself to be visible in the work he created in ways that range from the obvious to the deeply hidden. The most direct appearances are the ones where Groening appears as himself, as an animated character, usually in episodes that are already playing with meta levels of the show's reality. These appearances are obvious. He is named. He looks like himself, or like an animated version of himself. They are the creator in his creation, wearing no disguise. Less obvious are the appearances that work through proxy. Springfield is full of Groening's personal history, distributed through the geography and the population in ways that are legible only to people who know where to look. The street names from Portland. The character names drawn from his family. His father's name was Homer, his mother was Marge, his sisters were Lisa and Maggie. The Groening family as the Simpson family, filtered through caricature and cartoon distance and decades of creative development until the connection is simultaneously obvious and distant. The name Bart is the outlier. It is not a Groening family name. It is, by Groening's own account, an anagram of brat, a word that carries the specific cultural weight of American attitudes toward misbehaving children in the early 1980s. When the character was being developed, it is the one place where the show's creator deliberately departed from the autobiographical reservoir, choosing a word over a person. This choice tells you something about how Groening understood his own role in the family's creation. Not the child, whose misbehavior required a word rather than a name, but the father whose name was Homer and the mother whose name was Marge, the adult positions, the ones with the responsibility and the love and the limitations that come with both. Groening's camouflage as the creator of Bart, rather than as Bart himself, is the truest thing about his relationship with the show. He made Bart. He is not Bart. He is the adult who understood Bart from the outside, who knew the specific quality of a child whose intelligence and creativity are expressed as resistance to authority, who gave that quality shape and voice and a yellow face and 10 years of age that would never change. He created the mischief from a position of understanding it rather than embodying it. The name was always going to be a word, not a name, because that character belonged to the audience, to every viewer who saw themselves in him, not to his creator. Number, extended. The sound of Springfield. The show's music, composed and arranged by Alf Clausen for the first 27 seasons before he was replaced in 2017, represents one of the most sustained and consistent bodies of musical work in the history of American television. Clausen scored over 500 episodes across nearly 3 decades, developing along the way an approach to the show's musical language that was simultaneously parodic and genuinely accomplished, able to deploy the specific codes of film and television music against themselves while also creating original work that functioned on its own terms. The orchestra Clausen assembled and led for the show's recording sessions was a real orchestra of professional musicians, not a synthesized approximation. This choice, maintained across budget pressures and the increasing availability of digital alternatives, reflected a commitment to a certain quality of sound that was understood as essential to the show's identity. The Simpsons sounds the way it sounds because Clausen believed that real instruments played by real musicians produce a quality of warmth and specificity that no synthesizer can replicate, and because the production agreed with him for 27 seasons. His replacement by a different approach to the show's musical scoring in 2017 was handled with a minimum of public communication from the production. Clausen learned he had been replaced through an indirect communication rather than a direct conversation with anyone in the production's leadership, which is a fact he has discussed with quiet candor in interviews given after the fact. The decision was made for budgetary reasons, primarily, and was consistent with broader industry trends away from live orchestral recording toward more cost-efficient digital alternatives. The change is audible to anyone who listens carefully. The show's musical texture in recent seasons is different from the musical texture of the Clausen years, in ways that are difficult to articulate but are unmistakably present. Something about the room in which the music was recorded, the specific acoustic environment of a live orchestra in a real space, is absent. The music is technically accomplished. It is not the same. The specific moment in the show's audio history that has received the most sustained analysis from people who care deeply about this dimension of the show is the Danny Elfman theme. Elfman composed the opening theme, the instantly recognizable piece that plays over the credits, and that has become one of the most culturally embedded pieces of music in American entertainment history. It is the music that tells you, before the visual has fully registered, exactly where you are. Elfman wrote it quickly, by his own account, in the spirit of the specific brief he had been given. Something that would be recognizable, that would be distinctive, that would signal the show's specific quality of playful menace in its opening seconds. He delivered something that has outlasted almost everything else in his career in terms of pure cultural penetration. More people know this piece of music than know Danny Elfman's name. More people have heard it more times than they have heard almost any other single piece of music composed in the last 40 years. The piece is also, if you listen to it carefully, remarkably strange. The specific harmonic language is not quite the language of conventional television theme music. It has an edge, a slight quality of wrongness, that sits underneath the cheerfulness in a way that only becomes audible when you are listening for it. This is the theme of a show that is not quite a normal show, scored by a composer who understood that and expressed it in the specific choice of which notes to use and which to avoid. Springfield sounds like Springfield before it looks like Springfield. The music arrives first. It lands in the nervous system in the way that music lands, below the level of conscious interpretation. And it says, "You are here. You are back. Everything is as it was. Everything is always as it was." Number extended. The couch and the American sofa. The couch in the Simpsons' living room is not a specific piece of furniture. It is many specific pieces of furniture, depending on which season you are watching, and a few episodes in which it is something else entirely. But across its many variations and its hundreds of couch gag iterations, it maintains a consistent identity as the show's central image. The place where the family assembles, the site of return, the object toward which every opening sequence is aimed. The American relationship with the sofa is a subject that has received less serious cultural attention than it deserves. The sofa is where American family life happens, in a specific sense. It is the furniture of shared leisure, the object around which the family gathers when it is not working or sleeping or eating, when it is doing the thing that is neither productive nor restorative, but is simply being together, watching television, being in the same room. The ambient companionship of people who share a space and a life without necessarily engaging with each other at any particular intensity. The Simpsons understood this from the beginning. The couch as the destination of the opening credits is not arbitrary. It is saying something true about where American family life actually takes place, in contrast to where it is idealized as taking place. Not the dinner table, not a shared outdoor activity, not a structured family event. The couch, in front of the television, together. There is something subversive in this image that has become so familiar it is almost invisible. The show that was accused, in its earliest seasons, of being a bad influence on American families, of depicting a father who was stupid and a son who was disrespectful and a family whose dysfunction was being normalized, structured its most fundamental image as the most honest representation of how American families actually lived in 1989. Not as they aspired to live, as they lived. The dinner table is the aspirational American family image. The couch is the actual one. The Simpsons chose the couch, and in choosing the couch, the show claimed something, that the actual, unaspirational, imperfect life of the American family, the evenings in front of the television, the conversations that are partly directed at the screen rather than at each other, the comfort of proximity rather than engagement is worth depicting honestly. That this life is not a failure of the aspirational ideal, that this life is what most people are actually living, and that most people are living it because it is a real form of human connection, warm and sustainable in its ordinariness. The couch receives the family at the end of every opening sequence. It receives you at the end of every day, or at the end of a particular evening, or on a Sunday night, Or whenever you find yourself watching the show because you wanted something familiar and warm and present in the room with you. The show understood that this need for something familiar, warm, present was not a lesser need than the need for novelty or challenge or artistic elevation. It was a real need. It was the need the show was built to serve. And it serves it still, 36 years later. The couch is there, the family is assembling. Whatever has happened today, whatever the world has brought to your door, whatever is unresolved and heavy and waiting for tomorrow, tonight there is the couch. Tonight there is Springfield. Tonight the family arrives from their separate days and gathers in the one place they always return to, and the episode begins, and for 22 minutes, everything that is not this is somewhere else. The couch is not a piece of furniture, it is a promise. And for 36 years, the show has kept it. Number. Extended. The episodes that should not have worked. There is a category of Simpsons episode that exists at the edge of what the show's format should be able to support episodes whose premises are so specific, so strange, so unlike what a conventional animated family comedy has any business attempting that they should fail. By any reasonable prior assessment of what this kind of show can do, these episodes should not work. They should be disasters of tonal mismatch or narrative ambition exceeding the form's capacity. They are not disasters. They are, in several cases, among the finest episodes in the show's history. And the specific question of why they work, what specific quality of the show's construction allows it to sustain these experiments, is one that reveals something fundamental about what the show actually is. Homer's Barbershop Quartet is an episode structured as a Beatles documentary parody. It is also, without comment, one of the most emotionally honest examinations of creative friendship and its limits that American television has produced. The episode takes Homer's history as a member of a barbershop quartet that briefly achieves Beatles-level cultural fame, develops it with detail and care, and then allows it to end in the specific way that creative friendships end, with success, and then with the different priorities that success reveals in people who thought they wanted the same things. The episode should be too clever. It should be all reference and no feeling. It is instead all feeling, with the reference as its language. This is the show at its most formally sophisticated, using a recognizable structure as the vehicle for something that requires that structure's specific shape to be expressed. Bart Sells His Soul is an episode that takes the premise of its title completely seriously. Bart sells his soul to Milhouse for a small amount of money, discovers that something is different without it, and spends the episode trying to get it back. The episode requires the viewer to accept that souls are real, that they have specific effects on lived experience, and that losing one is a genuine loss rather than a cartoon premise. The show earns this acceptance by treating the premise with complete seriousness from within its own comic register. The ending of the episode, in which Bart recovers his soul and is physically reunited with it, a wordless sequence of tremendous emotional impact, should not work. It is a cartoon resolution to a theological premise. There is no way for the images to make the abstract concrete in a way that does not feel cheap. The show does it anyway, and it works, because the episode has done the work of making the abstract feel genuinely at stake. When Bart gets his soul back, you feel something. The feeling is real. The premise was a cartoon. These two things coexist in the experience of watching. One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish is the episode in which Homer believes he is going to die after eating poisonous fugu at a sushi restaurant. He spends the episode making a list of things he wants to do in his last 24 hours. He does most of them. Some he cannot do. Some he has never done, and realizes, with the specific quality of recognition that belongs to finality, he is not going to do. At the end of the episode, he falls asleep in his chair listening to tape-recorded advice from his father and wakes up the next morning alive, having apparently been prepared for the wrong kind of blowfish. He goes to work. The episode ends with Homer going to work. On what was supposed to be the day after his death, the show does not comment on the reversal. Homer is not transformed by his brush with mortality. He is not enlightened or different or changed. He goes to work. The episode trusts the audience to feel the weight of this, the specific quality of the ordinary morning that follows the extraordinary vigil, without being told what to feel. This is the show at its most confident in its own capacity to generate meaning without directing it. The ending works because it is true. This is how mortality works. In ordinary American life, for ordinary people, you prepare, you say goodbye, and then, if you live, you go to work. The life continues. The work continues. The thing you were afraid to lose resumes in its ordinary form, and the ordinariness is both a relief and a kind of disappointment, and you are grateful anyway. Lisa the Iconoclast is an episode that is structurally a civic conspiracy thriller and emotionally a meditation on the cost of telling the truth. Lisa discovers that the town's founding father, Jebediah Springfield, was not the hero the town's mythology portrays, but was a murderous pirate and fraud. She pursues the truth. She finds the evidence. She has the chance to reveal it publicly, and she chooses not to. Her reason is the episode's most important line, delivered quietly at the end after a great deal of noise. She has realized that the myth serves the town in ways that the truth would not. That Jebediah Springfield, the myth, gives the townspeople a story about themselves that makes their community worth caring about, and that the truth, while true, would take something from them that they cannot easily replace. This is not a comfortable conclusion. It is not triumphant. It is the conclusion of someone who has understood that the world is more complicated than the value of truth as an absolute principle, and who has made a choice that she finds genuinely difficult and genuinely right simultaneously. Lisa, the show's most consistent advocate for honesty and principle, choosing the sustaining myth over the uncomfortable fact. It is the most honest thing the show ever said about idealism and its limits. Number extended. The animation style and what it hides. The visual language of The Simpsons was established early and maintained with remarkable consistency for the first decade of the show's run, before beginning the gradual process of digital updating that has transformed its appearance. Across the subsequent 25 years, the original hand-drawn style, with its specific quality of warmth and slight imprecision, gave the show a visual texture that was entirely its own, recognizable at a glance, unlike anything that preceded it, establishing a set of visual conventions that other shows subsequently borrowed from in ways that amounted to the creation of a visual dialect. The yellow skin of the Springfield residents is the most discussed visual choice in the show's history, and Groening's explanation of it, that it would be instantly recognizable when a viewer channel surfed past it, is practically and economically accurate. But it is also, as the radiation theory discussed earlier in this video argues, a visual marker that is doing more work within the show's world than a channel surfing strategy requires. Yellow is not a neutral color for human skin. It is not a color that exists in the natural range of human skin tones. It is a deviation, a departure from the human, placed consistently on every Springfield resident in a way that distinguishes them visually and immediately from any representation of humans outside Springfield. When guest characters who do not live in Springfield are drawn with more naturally colored skin, the contrast between the Springfield population and the outside world is visible in the color palette. The Springfieldians are yellow, the visitors are not. The visual difference encodes the difference between the contamination zone and the world outside it, if you are looking at it with the radiation theory in mind. Whether this was intentional is a question that Groening has deflected with characteristic humor whenever it has been directly asked. His answer is always some version of, "It was a practical decision about channel surfing. Plus, it looked good." This is not a denial. It is also not a confirmation. It is the answer of someone who understands that the question is interesting and prefers not to close it. The 4 fingers on each hand, which is the other universally noted departure from human anatomy in the show's visual design, was a standard animation shortcut that dates to the earliest days of American animation. Characters drawn with 4 fingers instead of 5 are easier to animate convincingly because the hand has 1 fewer element to manage in motion, and because 4 fingers allows for visual groupings that are cleaner and more readable at animation frame rates. Mickey Mouse had 4 fingers. Almost every animated character from the golden age of American animation had 4 fingers. The Simpsons continuing this practice was a direct inheritance from the tradition the show was drawing from. But within the show's world, every Springfield resident has 4 fingers. Every visitor has 5. This is not always perfectly maintained. The show's visual consistency has never been perfect, and there are episodes where the rule breaks for practical reasons, but it is the general principle. Springfield people have 4 fingers, outside people have 5. The radiation theory accounts for this too. A mutation distributed uniformly across the contaminated population, visible in the hands, invisible to anyone inside the zone who has never known any differently. The specific quality of the show's hand-drawn style in its early seasons has a warmth that is partly technical and partly philosophical. The slight imprecision of hand-drawn animation, the lines that are not quite straight, the proportions that shift slightly between frames, the textures that have the quality of actual marks made by actual hands creates a different relationship between the viewer and the image than digital animation produces. The image is visibly made. The evidence of making is part of the image. The viewer understands, without thinking about it, that what they are seeing is the product of a person's physical labor. Someone sat down and drew this. Digital animation removes this evidence. The lines are perfect. The proportions are consistent. The image is clean in a way that hand-drawn images cannot be. This cleanliness has genuine advantages. The show looks more polished, the character movements are more fluid. Certain kinds of visual comedy that require precise timing are easier to execute, but it comes at the cost of the specific warmth that handmade imprecision generates. Fans who feel the show looks different in its modern form are not wrong. It does look different. The specific visual quality that defined the show in its golden period is a product of the hand-drawn process that has been substantially replaced. The characters are recognizable. The visual language has continuity. The warmth of imprecision is gone. Number. Extended. Nighttime in Springfield. Imagine Springfield after midnight. The nuclear plant running in its steady state, the cooling towers visible against the sky from anywhere in town, a constant low hum that the residents stopped hearing years ago because it has always been there. The streets quiet. The lights off in the houses on Evergreen Terrace. Homer is asleep on his side of the bed. The specific sleep of a person who does not worry about tomorrow because he does not have the neurological architecture for sustained worry. His sleep is complete and untroubled and has the quality of something that happens simply because he lies down and closes his eyes, without the machinery of anxiety that keeps so many people from the sleep they need. Marge is awake. This is what the show does not show you, but what the show's truest understanding of Marge implies. She is awake because someone has to be, because the specific position she occupies in the family requires a constant low-level vigilance that is not compatible with the complete sleep Homer manages. She is thinking about the refrigerator, which needs something, about Bart's grades, which are always in need of something, about Lisa, who is always in need of something that Marge does not always know how to provide, about Maggie, who is small and asleep in her crib and requires no thought but generates it anyway. Marge thinks about the family's finances, which are always slightly wrong, always slightly behind, always requiring the specific kind of management that involves remembering multiple small amounts and their various due dates and the priority order in which they should be paid when they cannot all be paid at once. This is work that Homer does not do, not because he is lazy exactly, but because it is beyond the specific type of attention he is capable of. He cannot hold these multiple things in order simultaneously. She can. So she does. Down the hall, Bart is asleep in the specific position of a child who has fallen asleep in motion, mid-thought, exactly where the day stopped for him. His sleep is not like Homer's exactly, because there is in Bart, even in sleep, a quality of potential motion. He is a person in whom things are always about to happen, and even unconscious he has this quality, this readiness. He will wake up and immediately begin his day at whatever speed his day requires. Lisa is awake too, or half awake, because she reads herself to sleep and has not yet fully crossed the line. She is in the specific state where the words on the page are still making sense but barely, where consciousness is draining away from the text and into the approaching sleep, and the last clear thought she will remember is usually something worth thinking about, something she has read, or thought about what she has read, or thought about something entirely different that the reading opened a door to. She carries this last thought into her sleep, and sometimes she wakes up knowing something that the previous day's Lisa did not know. This is what she thinks of as the best thing about being her. The nights that work that way, the mornings that bring something. Maggie is awake in the dark. She is almost always awake in the dark when the story is not watching her. She watches the ceiling. She watches the window where the light from the plant makes the sky a different quality of dark than the dark inside the room. She thinks in whatever language she thinks in, the pre-verbal one that is more direct than words and that she will eventually have to give up when she acquires language properly and language starts to replace the other thing. She is in no hurry. Springfield sleeps around them. The dogs in their yards. The cars in their driveways. The nuclear plant humming its constant note. The three-eyed fish moving through the river below the plant in the specific way that fish move at night, slower and more purposeful, following the water's current, through the darkness beneath the water's surface. Burns does not sleep, not in any simple way. His body's relationship with rest has been complicated by the treatments and the years and the specific condition of existing so far past the ordinary lifespan that the ordinary patterns of biological maintenance no longer apply. Straightforwardly, he sits in the manor and reads, or thinks, or looks out the window at the plant from which the manor's lights draw their power. He is old enough to remember when this land was different. He is old enough to remember things that no one alive can verify. He remembers, and the remembering is its own kind of company. Springfield sleeps and Springfield waits. For the morning, for the episode, for the couch gag and the credits, and the specific resumption of what it was yesterday and will be tomorrow. The plant hums. The water moves. The sky above the cooling towers holds its specific quality of light, the light of a town that is never completely dark because the plant never goes to sleep, because some things run continuously. You are almost there. The edge of sleep. The specific quality of sounds when you are almost asleep is beginning to arrive. Sounds that are the same sounds as before but that have begun to be part of something else, something that is not quite waking, but that is not quite the other thing either. You are in Springfield the way Springfield is in the snow globe. Held in something, contained in something, kept warm and still while outside the ordinary time keeps moving. Sleep, if you are going to sleep. Springfield will be here when you return to it. It has always been here. It will always be here. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. Number, extended, 36 years of Sundays. Think about what 36 years of weekly broadcast means in terms of the lived experience of any specific viewer. If you were 8 years old when The Simpsons debuted in December 1989, you are 44 or 45 years old now. You have watched this show for the majority of your life. You have watched it as a child, when the show was new and the characters were a genuinely fresh presence in your experience of television. You watched it as a teenager, when the show's satirical dimensions became available to you in ways they had not been when you were younger. You watched it in your 20s, when the show was simultaneously a comfort object and an increasingly complicated relationship, because the quality had changed and you were aware of the change, and the change mattered to you in a way that was slightly out of proportion to the practical consequence of a decline in quality in an animated sitcom. You have watched it through relationship changes and address changes, and job changes and losses and recoveries, through the specific small griefs and the significant large ones, through nights when you wanted noise in the room and nights when what you wanted was specifically this noise. You have watched it with people who are no longer part of your life, and in rooms that you no longer have access to, and in configurations of your own self that you can barely remember from the inside because you have changed so much since then. The show has not changed in the same ways. The show has changed, but it has not grown older the way you have grown older. It has not lost things in the way that lives lose things. It has added seasons, added episodes, revised its own creative standards in various directions, but the family at the center of it is exactly where they were in 1989, the same ages, the same house. The same couch. There is something about this that is specifically comforting in a way that becomes more acute as the viewer ages. When you are 20, the frozen quality of Springfield is mildly amusing, a quirk of the show's format that you accept without much feeling. When you are 44, the frozen quality of Springfield is something you actively treasure, because it is the rare thing in your life that does not change, that does not age, that does not require the specific grief that all aging things eventually generate. Bart at 10 is the same Bart who was there when you were 8. He is not the Bart you would have if Bart had aged with you, if the show had allowed the family to experience the same time you have experienced. That Bart would be 46. He would have left home decades ago. The family would have dispersed in all the ways that families disperse. Marriage, distance, the specific divergence of people who began in the same house and moved through different versions of the world until the shared point of origin is the only thing connecting them. That family is a family you know from life. It is the family that most people's families become, over enough time. The Simpsons is the other thing, the family that does not disperse, the family that the couch always returns, the family whose specific warmth is available on demand, every week, with the same people in the same place, for 36 years and counting. You cannot have this with real people. Real people age, real people move. Real relationships develop in directions that cannot be controlled or reversed. The specific configuration of the people you love and the place you share and the evening you are in together is always in real life temporary. It changes, it ends. Springfield does not end. Sunday nights have Springfield, or whatever night the show airs in your country, in your era, in your specific relationship with the broadcast schedule. The night the show airs has Springfield, and Springfield has the couch, and the couch has the family, and the family is exactly as it was. This is not a small thing. For a person who has been watching for 36 years and who has lived the things that 36 years of life brings, the persistent warmth of an unchanged Springfield is not a trivial comfort. It is one of the more real comforts available in the specific category of comfort that art provides. The assurance that some things are held, that some things persist, that the thing you loved when you were young has not outgrown you or left you behind, or become something you no longer recognize. The Simpsons is still there. The family is still on the couch gag is still playing. You are still you, watching from wherever you are watching, in whatever configuration of your life you are currently in. And for 22 minutes, you are also back there, back in the first time, back in the room where you first watched the opening credits and felt the specific feeling of something new that was already, somehow, familiar. Back in Springfield, which is the town where you have always lived, even when you were somewhere else entirely, where you will always live as long as the show runs. And maybe, in the archive, after it stops. Number. Extended. The Treehouse of Horror as True History. Every October, Springfield dies. Multiple times, in multiple ways, across multiple short stories assembled into the annual Halloween special that the show has produced every year since its second season. The Treehouse of Horror specials exist outside the show's regular continuity. They are explicitly designated as non-canonical, alternate universe stories, immune from the consequences that the regular season episodes accumulate. Characters die in them and return the following week. The laws of physics and narrative are suspended. Springfield is available for catastrophe without consequence. And this is why the Treehouse specials, taken seriously as a body of work across 34 years of annual production, reveal something about Springfield that the regular episodes cannot. Because when a world is freed from consequence, what it chooses to explore tells you what it is actually worried about. Springfield's Halloween fears, cataloged across 3 decades of specials, are a precise inventory of American anxieties. Technology replacing humanity, government overreach, corporate malevolence, alien invasion, time travel that makes things worse. The discovery that the familiar world is not what it appears. The specific terror of finding that the thing you trusted is dangerous. The monster inside the ordinary house, the threat inside the familiar institution, the wrongness at the heart of the normal. These fears are Springfield's fears because they are American fears. The Treehouse specials are the show's most direct engagement with the collective American imagination of threat, filtered through the specific lens of Springfield's demographics and geography. When the government in a Treehouse special reveals itself to be alien or malevolent, it is expressing the same distrust of institutional authority that runs through the show's regular episodes, but that the regular episodes can only approach through satire. The Treehouse can approach it directly, can let the government literally eat people, because the consequence-free frame gives the show permission to say the thing plainly. What is interesting about the Treehouse fears, historically, is how they have shifted across the 34 years of the special's production. The early Treehouse specials were engaged primarily with classic horror genre conventions, ghosts, demons, the supernatural refracted through the show's specific sensibility. They were affectionate parodies as much as horror stories, drawing their comedy from the gap between the genre's conventions and Springfield's inability to take those conventions seriously. As the specials continued across the 90s and into the 2000s, the fears became more contemporary and more specific. Technology fears increased as technology became a more central and more ambivalent presence in American life. The body horror specials, in which characters are physically transformed or invaded, became more frequent as cultural anxieties about bodily autonomy and pharmaceutical intervention intensified. The political specials, in which recognizable real-world political situations were given horror genre treatment, became more pointed as the political situations they were drawing from became more extreme. The specials are a historical document as much as they are entertainment. To watch them in sequence from the second season to the most recent is to watch American fear evolving in real time, expressed through the specific vocabulary of a show that has been paying attention to that fear for long enough to have a rich visual and narrative language for it. Springfield in October is the most honest Springfield. The regular season Springfield manages its fears through comedy, through the reset button, through the specific mechanism of collective denial that the Principal and the Pauper episode showed you explicitly. The October Springfield does not have to manage them. The October Springfield can just be afraid, openly, completely, and let the fear play out to its natural conclusion, and then reset the following week with nothing changed. The fear is real. The consequence is not. This is also, in its own way, a kind of Springfield logic. Number. Extended. The Simpsons and the newspaper. For many years, in the 90s, The Simpsons was reviewed by television critics as a television program. This seems obvious. It was a television program. Of course it was reviewed by television critics. But the specific institutional context of this, what it meant for a piece of popular animated entertainment to be taken seriously by serious reviewers, what the reviewing culture of the period made available and unavailable in terms of analytical frameworks is worth attending to, because it shaped the public understanding of the show in ways that persist. American newspaper television criticism in the early 90s had a complicated and somewhat apologetic relationship with popular entertainment. Critics who wrote for major newspapers were operating within institutions that had traditionally been skeptical of popular television as a legitimate subject of serious analysis, and this institutional skepticism required critics to either perform a kind of apologetic distance from the popular material they were reviewing. This is, of course, merely entertainment, or to find frameworks from literary or film criticism that they could import into the television context to lend the analysis institutional credibility. The Simpsons presented a specific challenge to this critical culture because it was simultaneously, unmistakably, extremely popular and genuinely worthy of serious analysis. It was both things at once, without apology. It did not require a defense of its populism or an explanation of why it deserved to be taken seriously. It simply was serious, in the specific way that things are serious when they are doing exactly what they are trying to do at the highest possible level. Critics who were willing to engage with this directly, who were able to analyze the show as comedy and as cultural artifact and as animation and as television without importing inappropriate frameworks from other disciplines, produced the most illuminating criticism of the show's golden period. Critics who were not willing to do this, or who were constrained by institutional expectations about what serious criticism looked like, produced analysis that told you more about the critical institution than about the show. The show's relationship with print media inside the show Springfield's various newspapers and their uniformly catastrophic standards is itself a commentary on this dynamic. The Springfield Shopper and the other journalistic institutions of Springfield exist primarily to be wrong, to misreport, to sensationalize, to capture whatever is most alarming and least accurate about any given situation, and deliver it to a readership that is insufficiently skeptical of what it reads. This is comedy, but it is comedy with specific targets, the specific failures of popular journalism, the specific ways that institutional media can be simultaneously authoritative-seeming and thoroughly unreliable. The show understood early that institutions are not trustworthy because they are institutions. They are trustworthy only to the degree that the people within them are committed to the specific disciplines of honesty and accuracy that the institution nominally upholds. Springfield's institutions are not full of people who are committed to those disciplines. Springfield's institutions are full of people who are doing the minimum the institution requires, or who are using the institution's authority for personal benefit, or who are simply too limited by circumstances to do what the institution nominally exists to do. The newspaper reports inaccurately. The school fails its students. The police do not protect the population they are supposed to protect. The government does not govern in the interests of the governed. These institutional failures are not portrayed as aberrations. They are the normal operating condition of Springfield's civic life. The aberration, in Springfield's world, would be an institution that functioned as it was supposed to. The aberration would be a Springfield shopper that reported accurately. The absence of the aberration, which is the baseline assumption of the show's world, says something about what the show believes about institutions in general. And this belief, which was expressed as satire in the 90s, has aged in ways that are difficult to describe as anything other than prophetic. Not because the show predicted specific institutional failures in specific ways, but because the show's general skepticism about institutional reliability, its assumption that institutions tend to serve the interests of the people with power within them rather than the interests of the people they nominally serve, reflects an understanding of how institutions actually work, that the subsequent 30 years of American public life have done a great deal to confirm. Springfield was always a realistic town. The realism was just dressed in yellow skin and 4 fingers, which made it easier to look at than it would have been without the costume. Number extended. Marge. Actually, the critical literature on The Simpsons has consistently undervalued Marge. This is both understandable and wrong. Understandable because Marge is defined, in the show's visual and narrative shorthand, by her role relative to the other characters. She is Homer's wife, Bart's mother, Lisa's mother, Maggie's mother. Her storylines in the earlier seasons frequently involve her processing the consequences of decisions made by other characters, managing the emotional aftermath of situations created by Homer or Bart, sustaining the family's functioning through the specific labor of care and management that is not dramatic and does not generate the kind of stories that are easily discussed as achievements. But this reading misses what is actually happening with Marge. And what is actually happening with Marge is one of the more honest and difficult things the show has done consistently across its history. Marge is a person who has made choices that significantly constrain her options and that she inhabits with a complicated mixture of genuine commitment and genuine grief. She chose Homer. She had 3 children. She lives in Springfield in the specific condition of the American working-class wife of the early 90s. Primary caregiver, household manager, part of the economic unit of the family in ways that are not recognized as economic contributions because they do not produce wages. She did not choose this structure, exactly. She moved into it through a series of choices that each seemed reasonable in isolation, that accumulated into a life that is genuinely hers, and that is also genuinely constraining in ways that a different series of choices might not have been. The show is honest about this. The episodes that center on Marge, particularly in the earlier seasons, do not resolve her specific position into either acceptance or rejection. They do not say that she should be satisfied with what she has, and they do not say that she should leave. They say that she is a person in a specific position, with specific capacities and specific frustrations, navigating the specific complexity of a life she has chosen, and that has also happened to her in ways that choice does not fully describe. The episode where Marge discovers a gift for painting, develops it seriously, and then allows it to be subordinated to the family's other needs is one of the most honest episodes the show has produced about this specific tension. She is talented at something. She pursues it. The pursuit comes into conflict with the demands that the family's life places on her. She makes a choice that puts the family first. The episode does not reward this choice as virtue or condemn it as failure. It acknowledges it as the specific kind of choice that people in Marge's position make, repeatedly, for reasons that are genuinely complicated and that cannot be fully resolved by thinking harder about them. Julie Kavner's voice performance in these episodes carries something that is difficult to describe, but that is unmistakably present. A specific quality of suppressed feeling, of emotion that is managed rather than expressed, of a person who is more interior than exterior and who keeps more than she shows. This is not the performance of a 2-dimensional character. It is the performance of a person who has a deep interior that the show only occasionally gives itself permission to explore. The most significant of these explorations, the episodes where Marge is genuinely at the center, where her specific interiority is the subject rather than the background, are scattered through the show's history with enough consistency to constitute a hidden portrait of a character who has been systematically undervalued by both the show's internal narrative and its critical reception. This portrait is of a woman who is genuinely strong, not in the way that the word strength is often applied to female characters in popular fiction, which is to say not dramatically or heroically, but in the specific way that sustained commitment to an imperfect life constitutes strength. The willingness to stay, to keep managing, to love people who are difficult to love in ways that are never fully reciprocated, because the people you love do not always have the capacity to reciprocate in the way you need. Marge loves Homer in full awareness of his limitations. She loves Bart with a patience that is not natural to her but that she has developed because he requires it. She loves Lisa in ways that can feel like inadequacy because Lisa is so much of something that Marge is not, and Marge sometimes does not know how to bridge that distance. She loves Maggie in the way you love the small thing you are still in the process of knowing, with a completeness that is also a not yet, a promise of the relationship that will develop as the child develops, a warmth directed at a person who is mostly potential and who will eventually become someone specific. This is Marge. This is who the show has been depicting for 36 years. In the background of the stories about Homer and Bart and Lisa, sustaining the specific warmth that makes all the other stories possible. She is the reason Springfield is habitable. Not because she is warm and patient, though she is, because she is real. Because the show gave her, in its best moments, the specific complexity of a person who is fully present in a life that is imperfect and who continues in it with something that is not quite contentment and not quite resignation, but is something true, something that does not have a simple name. She is the couch. She is the return. She is the thing that is always there. Number, extended. The uncanny valley of Springfield. There is a term from robotics and computer animation, uncanny valley, that describes the specific discomfort produced when something is almost human, but not quite. The idea is that as a representation of a human gets more realistic, it becomes more appealing up to a certain point, after which the near-human quality of the representation triggers a response of unease rather than recognition. Something that is clearly not human is acceptable. Something that is clearly human is acceptable. Something that is almost but not quite human is disturbing in a way that is difficult to fully articulate. Springfield does not exist in the uncanny valley in the technical sense. The Simpsons characters are too far from realistic human representation to trigger uncanny valley responses in the clinical meaning. They are yellow and four-fingered and drawn in a style that does not aspire to visual realism. But there is a different, more metaphorical uncanny valley that Springfield inhabits, and it is more interesting than the technical one. It is the uncanny valley of ordinary life. Springfield is almost ordinary. The family is almost a real family. The problems they face are almost the problems of real people. The emotions they experience are almost the emotions of real people navigating real situations. And this near ordinariness, this consistent proximity to the real, without ever quite being the real, is the source of the specific unease that the show's best episodes produce. When the show is working at its highest level, it occupies exactly this almost ordinary space. Something is slightly wrong with the normalcy. The comedy emerges not from the extreme departure from reality, but from the small departure, the almost. Homer almost has a normal job. Springfield almost has a normal civic life. The family almost functions in the way that families function. The small displacement from the ordinary is both the source of the comedy and the source of the feeling that something is not quite right. This is what the fan theories, taken together, are really describing. The radiation theory and the coma theory and the collective denial theory are all attempts to articulate the specific quality of almost normalcy that the show maintains. To explain why Springfield feels slightly wrong even when nothing obviously strange is happening. To account for the specific texture of the show's world, which is recognizable and warmly familiar, and also, at some level that is difficult to specify, not quite right. The theories are reaching for the uncanny valley of Springfield. They are trying to name the thing that makes you occasionally, watching a perfectly ordinary episode where nothing unusual happens, feel a faint quality of unease alongside the warmth. As if the ordinariness itself is the thing that is strange. As if the specific completeness of Springfield's self-contained world is a sign of something, rather than just the comfortable backdrop it presents itself as. This quality is not accidental. The show's creators understood from the beginning that comedy and unease are neighbors in a specific way, that the funny and the slightly wrong often occupy the same space, that the best comedy is the comedy that leaves you with something after the laugh, some residue of the thing the laugh was a response to. The Simpsons at its best always leaves this residue, the feeling, after the episode ends and the credits roll, that you have been somewhere that was not quite where you thought you were, that the family you just spent 22 minutes with is somehow both utterly real and slightly beyond reach. This is the show's most lasting gift. Not any specific episode or joke or character or theory. The specific quality of feeling that it creates in the people who give themselves to it, the sense of having been somewhere that is not quite anywhere, with people who are not quite anyone, in a story that is not quite a story but is something more like a presence. Springfield. You know where it is. You have always known. Number extended. The numbers behind the curtain. The Simpsons has generated somewhere between $10 and $15 billion in revenue across its history when all revenue streams are accounted for. Broadcast licensing, international distribution, home video and streaming, merchandise, theme park attractions, theatrical releases, music and soundtrack releases, and the long tail of ancillary rights that a cultural property of this scale accumulates over 36 years. These numbers are not publicly confirmed in their totality. The accounting of a long-running entertainment property across as many revenue streams as The Simpsons has is genuinely complex, and the parties with interest in the specific numbers have incentives to keep the totality private. What is publicly known is that the show is one of the most commercially successful pieces of entertainment content in the history of American television, that the syndication revenue alone has generated significant amounts for the companies that own the distribution rights, and that the merchandise licensing represented, particularly in the show's early years, a significant fraction of Fox's total entertainment revenue. This commercial reality sits underneath everything else. The salary negotiations, the creative decisions, the choices about what to keep in the archive and what to remove, the decisions about voice casting and the management of guest appearances, the international distribution arrangements, the merchandise approvals, and the recall decisions. All of these are decisions made within an economic context that is defined by these very large numbers. The show is worth billions of dollars. The people who own it know this. The people who make it know this. The decisions that are made about it are made by people operating within this knowledge, which creates specific pressures and specific constraints that a creative work made outside these commercial stakes would not have to navigate. This is not a cynical observation. It is simply the condition of the show's existence in the specific commercial context of American entertainment. The Simpsons was always going to be a commercial product as well as a creative work because that is what American network television is. The question was never whether it would have commercial pressures, but how those pressures would be managed in relation to the creative work. The answer, across 36 years, has been inconsistently. The commercial pressures have sometimes produced decisions that damage the creative work, the merchandise that misrepresented the characters, the salary negotiations that damaged internal relationships, the budget decisions that changed the show's musical texture. And sometimes the commercial success has protected the creative work. The show's financial importance to Fox has been the primary reason that it has been renewed for 36 seasons regardless of critical reception, because the commercial argument for continuing is strong enough to survive any amount of critical dissatisfaction. The billions of dollars have been, simultaneously, what corrupted the show and what preserved it. What allowed it to exist as a creative work for long enough to develop into something genuinely significant, and what created the conditions under which that significance was gradually compromised. The money is not a villain in this story, and it is not a savior. It is the context in which everything else happened, the background constant against which the foreground creative work has been operating for 36 years. Springfield runs on nuclear power. The show runs on advertising revenue and syndication rights. The specific fuel in each case creates specific conditions and specific problems. In each case, the problems are managed rather than resolved, because resolution would mean changing the fuel source, and changing the fuel source would mean something that neither Springfield nor the show can afford to become. Number extended. What hasn't been said? There are things that have not been said in this script that are worth acknowledging at the end of it. There are controversies about The Simpsons that have not been discussed here because they are either not fully documented or because the people involved are still living and the specific claims that would be required to address them responsibly cannot be fully verified from publicly available information. Television production histories are full of stories that are known within the industry and that have not found their way into the public record in forms that allow them to be repeated responsibly. The Simpsons, which has had a production history of unusual length and complexity, has more of these stories than most shows. There are creative choices the show made that have not been discussed here that deserve more attention than they have received. Specific formal experiments in particular episodes, specific instances of the show doing something formally unusual that were not recognized as unusual at the time, specific writers and directors whose contributions to the show's development are undersized in the critical literature. There are aspects of the international history of the show, the specific ways it has been received in specific countries, the specific controversies it has generated in specific cultural contexts, the specific versions of the show that exist in different language markets, and what makes them different, that a full accounting of what the show is and has been would require. There is the full history of the show's relationship with the animation labor movement, the specific negotiations and disputes and accommodations that have shaped the terms under which the people who draw the show have worked across its history. This history is not fully public, and what is public is not widely known. There is the history of the show's relationship with its creators, particularly with Matt Groening, whose relationship with a show he created, and that has continued for longer than he expected it to continue, has evolved in ways that are neither simple nor fully visible from the outside. These are the things that remain. The stories that are still being written, or that have been written but not yet published, or that will only be written when the people who know them are ready to tell them, or that may never be written because the people who know them have chosen not to tell them, which is their right, and which means those stories belong to Springfield. The way the best things about Springfield always have, not to be known fully, not to be resolved, but to remain interesting and alive and just out of reach. Springfield keeps its secrets the way towns keep their secrets. Not perfectly, not permanently, but long enough. Long enough that the truth is always somewhere between what you know and what you suspect, which is also, if you think about it, where the most interesting things always are. The show does not end tonight. It never ends tonight. Turn off the light. Let the voices become ambient. Let Springfield take over from wherever you are. Tomorrow the archive will still be there. The episodes will still be numbered in order. The couch will still be waiting. And whatever question you went to sleep with will still be there in the morning, the way Springfield is always there in the morning, consistent and warm and slightly strange and entirely familiar. Your town, their town, the town that belongs to everyone who has ever found it, which means it belongs to you. It has always belonged to you. Rest now. Number, extended, what Lisa knows. There is a reading of The Simpsons that places Lisa at its center rather than Homer, and this reading is not wrong. It is simply less comfortable than the Homer-centric reading, because what it reveals about the show is sadder. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old, and she is the most intelligent character in the show's regular cast. This is not in question. The show establishes her intelligence consistently, depicts its consequences consistently, and makes no apology for the fact that an 8-year-old girl is the clearest-eyed person in a town full of adults. She sees Springfield accurately. She sees what the radiation theory proposes, which is that something is wrong with the town at a structural level. She sees what the Burns analysis proposes, which is that the power concentrated in one man's hands shapes everyone else's options. She sees what the Mona Simpson conspiracy proposes, which is that her father's limitations are not his fault but are the product of a system that needed him limited. She sees all of this, and she is 8 years old, and she cannot do anything about it. This is the specific tragedy of Lisa Simpson, articulated not as tragedy by the show but as comedy. Her intelligence produces insight that exceeds the intelligence of every adult around her, and that insight is functionally worthless because she is a child. She can know everything and change nothing. She can see the system clearly and have no leverage against it. She can articulate the problem with precision and watch the problem persist despite the articulation. There is a specific kind of intelligence that works this way, the intelligence that allows you to perceive accurately without giving you the power to intervene effectively. It is a common experience among people who are intelligent but powerless, the specific agony of seeing clearly in a situation where seeing does not help. Lisa's intelligence is this kind of intelligence. It is accurate and impotent simultaneously. The show's treatment of this is, in its best moments, genuinely compassionate. It does not mock Lisa for caring or for knowing. It does not suggest that her intelligence is the problem, that if she were less perceptive she would be happier. What it suggests, more quietly and more honestly, is that the world as it is does not have a place for Lisa that is equal to what Lisa is. The world Springfield represents the specific world of American working-class life, with its economic pressures and its institutional failures, and its resistance to the kind of systematic change that would require confronting its own structural conditions, does not know what to do with an 8-year-old, who understands it more clearly than most of the adults living in it, and so it does what such worlds generally do with people it does not know what to do with. It lets them continue, and fails to accommodate them, and occasionally acknowledges their value in ways that change nothing about their circumstances. Lisa wins awards and the family is briefly proud and nothing changes. Lisa makes arguments that are irrefutable and nobody is persuaded. Lisa is right about almost everything and almost nothing follows from her being right. The flash-forward episodes, in which we see Lisa as an adult, generally show a version of her that is still fighting, still making arguments, still right about things, and still in a world that absorbs her rightness without being transformed by it. This is either a commentary on the specific futility of Lisa's position, or a realistic depiction of how intelligent, principled people actually navigate a world that was not built to reward intelligence and principle. Probably both. What the show has always understood, in its best moments, is that Lisa's isolation is real and that her isolation is the price of her accuracy. To see Springfield clearly is to be unable to be fully comfortable in it. To understand the system is to be unable to pretend the system is not there. And the people who cannot pretend the system is not there spend their lives in Springfield slightly outside the warmth of collective denial that makes Springfield livable for everyone else. Lisa is always slightly cold, always slightly outside the circle, always the person who knows something that the people in the circle have agreed not to know. And she will be 8 years old in this position forever, which is either the saddest thing about the show or the most honest thing about the show, and these may be the same thing. Number extended. The joke that changed everything. On the night of the 19th of April 1987, a Fox sketch comedy program called The Tracey Ullman Show aired a segment lasting approximately 90 seconds that depicted an animated yellow family getting ready for bed. The father attempted to read a bedtime story and fell asleep while reading it. The mother put the children to bed one by one. The segment ended. Matt Groening had submitted a set of original animated character designs for the segment after being approached to develop short animations for the show. He drew the family in the Fox parking lot, in the specific hurry of someone who has a deadline and a concept that is almost formed. He used his family's names. He made the father Homer, which was his own father's name. He made the mother Marge, which was his mother's name. He made the daughters Lisa and Maggie, which were his sisters' names. He made the son Bart, which was an anagram of brat, and which was not a family name, because the son was something else, the person in the family who needed to be invented rather than remembered. The segment aired. It was different from anything else on American television. Not dramatically different, not obviously different in the way that things are obviously different when they are genuinely new. Different in the specific way that things that will later be understood as new are different at first. Slightly wrong, slightly off from the normal register, occupying a space that did not quite exist before them. The Tracey Ullman Show segments ran for 3 seasons, developing the family and the town gradually, testing what the format could do and discovering its specific possibilities. By the end of this period, it was clear that the characters and their world were larger than the sketch format that contained them. The Fox network commissioned a half-hour special, and then a series. The series premiered on the 17th of December 1989. What happened between that April 1987 night and December 1989 is a story about the specific conditions under which a new thing becomes possible. Fox needed animated programming. The Tracey Ullman Show's existing ratings infrastructure provided something to build from. Groening had a concept. James L. Brooks, who was producing The Ullman Show, had the institutional standing to make the necessary decisions. Sam Simon, who would become the show's third principal creator alongside Groening and Brooks, had the specific expertise in television comedy structure and the writer's room management that the project needed. The combination of these specific people with these specific resources in this specific institutional context produced The Simpsons. Change one element and you do not get the show. You get something else, or you get nothing. The show is the product of a specific confluence of circumstances that was unlikely enough that it is worth understanding what happened when it did occur. The joke that changed everything was not any specific joke in any specific episode. It was the decision to take the sketch seriously, to treat the 90-second parking lot drawings as the beginning of something rather than as an end in themselves, to give the family a half hour, and then a season, and then another season, and to keep going for 36 years while the world changed around them and they stayed exactly the same. Number extended. The Last Donut. There is an image from the show's early seasons that has become so familiar that it functions as a visual shorthand for the show itself. The way that certain images from certain cultural works detach from their contexts and become available as standalone references for something larger. Homer reaching for a donut. The specific quality of desire in that reaching, the complete and uncomplicated commitment to the wanting, has become the show's most portable image. The donut is not a sophisticated symbol. It does not require unpacking in the way that the couch, or the plant's cooling towers, or Lisa's saxophone require unpacking. It is exactly what it appears to be, a food desired. Homer wants it the way Homer wants most things, immediately and completely, and without the self-monitoring that might complicate or qualify the desire. He does not wonder whether he should want it. He does not assess the nutritional content or the opportunity cost. He sees the donut and the wanting begins, and the wanting is so immediate and so total that it has a quality of purity. This purity is the source of the image's comedic power and its specific pathos. Homer's wanting is never complicated by the machinery of self-consciousness that makes wanting difficult for most people. He is free of the specific anxiety that attaches to desire in people who are aware of being observed desiring. He wants the donut and the world is the donut and everything else is background. This is presented as comedy. It is also, if you take it seriously, a depiction of a specific kind of freedom. The freedom of a person who has been relieved by radiation, or by brain damage, or by the grace of the animation that made him of the specific burden of self-consciousness. Homer does not know how he looks when he wants something. He does not manage his wanting to avoid looking foolish. He wants fully, from the beginning, without the editing that self-awareness imposes. The donut is the symbol of this, not of appetite in a simple sense, but of unedited wanting, of desire that is not ashamed of itself, of the specific quality of complete presence in a moment of desire that most people only achieve occasionally, usually accidentally, usually in private. Springfield is, among other things, the place where this kind of wanting is normal, where the donut is always there to be wanted, and the wanting is always total, and nobody thinks less of Homer for wanting it. Because in Springfield, everyone is Homer. At some level, everyone has given up on the specific dignity of managed desire and is just wanting what they want, completely, in public, as if they have nothing to be ashamed of. Maybe they don't. Maybe Springfield, for all its contamination and dysfunction and collective denial, has gotten something right about this. Maybe the donut is just the donut. Number. Extended. The viewer who has not yet arrived. Somewhere in the world, a child is watching The Simpsons for the first time right now. Or they will watch it for the first time tomorrow, or next week, or in a few years when they are old enough to have it recommended by someone who remembers when they first watched it and wants to share what they found there. This child does not know yet that the show is old, that it has been running since before their parents were grown, that the archive they have access to contains episodes from a world that was substantially different from the one they are living in. They will learn this, eventually, but at the beginning they do not know it, and the not knowing is the condition that allows the first encounter to happen fully, without the freight of context. For this child, Springfield will be new. The couch gag will be something they have not seen before. Homer will be a stranger. The nuclear plant on the horizon of the opening sequence will be something they are encountering for the first time. And the specific feeling of that first encounter, the recognition that this place has a specific quality, that something is strange here in a way that is also warm, that the family in this house has a specific character that is different from families they know from other shows, will be entirely fresh. The show will do what it has done for 36 years of first encounters. It will arrive. It will be strange and familiar simultaneously. It will make the child laugh without entirely knowing why. It will have moments that are more than funny, that have a quality of feeling that the child will not yet have the vocabulary to describe, but that they will remember, the way you remember specific sensations from childhood without always being able to name what they were. The child will become a viewer. The viewer will become a person who has been watching the show for years. The person will carry the show through their life the way you carry things that found you early and stayed. As a resource, a reference, a warmth that is available when it is needed, and that does not require explanation because it has been part of the interior furniture for long enough to be assumed. And they will find the theories, eventually. The coma theory and the radiation theory and the questions about who shot Burns and where Springfield actually is. They will find the behind-the-scenes stories. the salary disputes and the pulled episodes and the characters who are gone. They will find the debates about which season was the last good one, and the arguments for why the show before some specific point was different from the show after it. They will find the fan communities and the rewatches, and the close analysis of specific frames and specific seconds of specific episodes that matters so much to people who care about this show. And through all of it, the show will be there. New episodes and old episodes and the archive that contains all of it. The specific warmth of a Springfield Sunday. The couch that always receives the family. The opening notes of the theme that tell you, before anything else, where you are. The child who is watching for the first time right now will understand, eventually, what the people who have been watching for 36 years already know, that Springfield is not a place you visit. It is a place you live in, part-time, on the specific schedule that the show establishes. That the characters are not fictional in the way that most fictional characters are fictional. That something about the way the show is constructed, its persistence, its consistency, its specific quality of warmth, has made them real in the way that only long familiarity makes things real. Real in the sense of being present in memory. Real in the sense of being available when you need them. Real in the sense of having been part of the specific shape of who you have become, having accompanied you through enough of your life that they are part of the texture of it. Springfield is real because you have been there. Because you keep going back. Because when you return, everything is exactly as you left it, and this constancy has its own meaning, independent of whether the episodes are as good as they once were, or whether the show is as culturally central as it was in 1993. The constancy is the meaning. The staying is the point. The show does not end because the family does not end. The family does not end because we will not let it. And we will not let it because we are not ready to let go of the version of ourselves that first sat down in front of the television and heard those opening notes and arrived for the first time in Springfield. The child watching right now will understand this in 30 years, when they have been watching long enough for the understanding to be personal rather than abstract. They will understand that Springfield is the place they have been carrying this whole time, the background constant against which the foreground of their lives has been changing. The place that stayed while they moved. The family that persisted while theirs dispersed. They will understand it the way you understand it now. Sitting wherever you are sitting, at whatever hour this has found you. They will know what this is. What it has always been. They will be home. And that is everything. 36 seasons. 800 and some episodes. One family on one couch in one impossible town that is somehow also every town. If you are still here, still awake, still with us in Springfield? Thank you. Drop your location and the time in the comments. We want to know where in the world Springfield has reached tonight. And if you have been drifting, if you closed your eyes somewhere around the salary wars and let the voices carry you forward through all the theories and the controversies and the explanations and the mysteries, that is exactly right. That is exactly what this is for. Subscribe if you want more nights like this. There are more mysteries, there always are. Good night from Springfield. Good night from the couch. Good night. Number extended. The things nobody argues about. After all the controversies, the salary wars, the pulled episodes, the creative disagreements, the merchandise recalls, and everything else that has been contested about The Simpsons across 36 years of production and reception, there are things about the show that nobody argues about. Things that are simply true, accepted without dispute, so obvious that they are rarely stated explicitly because stating them would feel like explaining why water is wet. Nobody argues about the table read. The practice of recording the full cast together before individual sessions is universally understood as one of the show's most important production decisions. The practice that gives the performances their specific quality of responsiveness and mutual awareness. You can hear it in the episodes. You can hear people reacting to each other rather than performing into a void. The table read is one of the conditions of the show's excellence, and nobody disputes this. Nobody argues about the archive's value. Whatever the debates about specific episodes, whatever the controversies about what should be removed or altered, there is no serious argument that the show's archive should not exist or that the earlier seasons are not extraordinary. The debates about specific episodes presuppose an archive worth having debates about. The archive is worth having. Nobody argues about the music in the way they argue about everything else. The specific genius of the Danny Elfman theme, the specific achievement of Alf Clausen's orchestral work across 500 episodes, the specific quality of the show's musical identity. These are, in the specific community of people who care deeply about this show, not controversial. They are simply acknowledged. The show sounds like itself, and what it sounds like is distinctive and excellent, and cannot be separated from what it is. Nobody argues about the voice cast. Whatever the disputes about specific characters and their specific evolutions, the 6 principal voices are understood as one of the most remarkable ongoing creative relationships in American entertainment. The specific quality of each voice, Castellanetta's Homer, Kavner's Marge, Cartwright's Bart, Smith's Lisa, is inseparable from the characters. This is acknowledged without dispute, and nobody argues about whether the show mattered. Whatever your position on the specific seasons, whatever your view of the decline, whatever your theory about Springfield's fundamental nature or Homer's coma or who actually shot Mr. Burns, nobody argues that The Simpsons didn't matter, that it wasn't significant, that it didn't do something to American culture and to the people who were formed by it that was real and lasting and worth attending to. The arguments are about the specifics. The agreement is about the fundamental thing. The show existed, it was extraordinary. It lasted. It accumulated, across 36 years of consistent production, into something that has no exact parallel in the history of American entertainment. A family that hasn't aged. A town that isn't anywhere. A show that never quite ends. This is what all the controversies are arguments in the presence of. Not despite the controversy, but because of it, the show is worth arguing about. Worth caring about enough to have strong feelings about where it went wrong, or whether it went wrong at all, or what the right reading of its mysteries is. Worth the specific investment of attention and feeling that arguments require. That investment is the final evidence, not the ratings or the revenues or the cultural footprint. The fact that people care. The fact that 36 years in, there are still things to say about Springfield that feel worth saying. Still episodes to argue about. Still theories that explain something true about the show or about the world the show reflects, or about the people who have spent meaningful portions of their lives in its company. The caring is the testimony. Springfield mattered because people let it matter, because the show gave them something to care about that was worthy of caring, because the family on the couch was real enough and warm enough and true enough that caring about them felt like a reasonable thing to do. It was reasonable. It remains reasonable. It will continue to be reasonable for as long as the archive exists, and the show airs, and new people find it, and old people return to it in the specific way that you return to things that were part of how you became who you are. Springfield is waiting. It is always waiting. It has always been waiting. Come home. Number. Extended. The quiet miracle of continued existence. 36 years is a duration that is difficult to fully hold in mind. It is longer than a human generation. It is long enough that a child who was born on the night of the premiere has lived their entire life, childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, the beginning of middle age in the company of a show that has not changed in the ways they have changed. It is long enough that parents who watch the show with their children have watched those children grow up and move away, while Bart stays 10 and Lisa stays 8, and the couch gag plays another week. The quiet miracle of this continued existence is not the continued existence itself. Any show can run long enough on commercial inertia, but the fact that it has continued to produce individual moments, scattered across its later seasons like small lights in a dimming room, that have the specific quality of the show at its best. Moments where the comedy and the feeling converge, where the character is fully present, where something true about family or work or mortality or love is expressed through the specific visual language of a yellow family in an impossible town. These moments do not come as frequently as they did in seasons 4 through 8. They are less dense, less consistent, surrounded by more material that is simply competent rather than exceptional. But they come. They have continued to come, season after season, across 3.5 decades, which means that the capacity that produced the show's greatest work has not been entirely exhausted or abandoned. It is diminished but present, quieter but alive. And this ongoing presence of genuine excellence within a body of increasingly uneven work is its own kind of testimony. The show does not end because the capacity for this kind of moment does not end. The couch gag plays, and occasionally it is extraordinary. The episode proceeds, and occasionally it contains a scene that is the show at its truest. The archive grows, and in the growing it accumulates. Still, the specific kind of material that makes the whole archive worth having. This is what you are watching when you watch The Simpsons now. A show that is capable of still surprising you, still moving you, still producing the specific quality of feeling that you came to it for, embedded within a larger body of work that no longer does this consistently. You are watching for the moments, and the moments are still there. Springfield provides them, quietly, at intervals that do not always announce themselves in advance. You watch expecting the ordinary, the competent, the continuation, and occasionally the show gives you something else. The moment where the ordinary becomes extraordinary, where the cartoon becomes briefly and unmistakably real, where the family on the couch looks back at you across the 36 years, and you feel the thing you felt the first time you watched them, in a room that no longer exists, in a version of yourself that has changed in every way except this one. This is what the show has always been. This is what it still is. Whatever else is true about it. Go to sleep now. Springfield is still here. The light from the nuclear plant touches the clouds above Springfield tonight. The same light it has always been. The same clouds. The same town beneath them. Unchanged from what it was when you first saw it. Unchanged from what it will be the next time you return. The plant hums. The family sleeps. Bart's hand hangs off the mattress. Lisa's saxophone rests on its stand. Maggie watches the ceiling with her enormous eyes and thinks her pre-verbal thoughts that no one will ever fully know. Marge lies in the dark and holds everything together with the specific invisible work of caring. Homer sleeps completely, without guilt, without worry, without the machinery of self-consciousness that keeps so many people from the rest they need. He sleeps the way only the genuinely simple or the genuinely enlightened can sleep, without reservation. And Burns, in his manor on the hill, sits with his ancient thoughts and waits for the morning treatment that will give him another week. The town below belongs to him, and he knows it. He has always known it. He does not sleep, but he is patient in the way that things which have waited a long time for everything are patient. He can afford to wait. Springfield waits with him. It is very good at waiting. It has been waiting for 36 years, patient and warm and slightly strange, for you to find your way back to it. Here you are. You found your way back. Sleep. Number. Section 12. The final loop why Springfield never ends. There is a specific quality to falling asleep in a room where a television is on in the background. The voices become ambient. The distinctions between the sounds, dialogue, music, audience response begin to blur into something more continuous. The specific meaning of words gives way to the rhythm and texture of speech itself. You are no longer watching the television. You are being accompanied by it. It is present in the room with you while you cross the boundary between waking and sleep, a companion in the transition. Many people who have been watching The Simpsons for a long time describe their relationship with the show in terms that are adjacent to this experience, even when they are watching it attentively. There is a quality to the show, to its Springfield, to its specific rhythms, to the unchanging voices of characters who have been speaking in the same register for 36 years, that is profoundly familiar, in a way that goes beyond familiarity with content. It is familiar the way a particular smell is familiar, the way a particular kind of light is familiar, something that your body knows without being told. That triggers a response that is below the level of cognition. This is what the show has built across 36 years of unbroken weekly presence in American homes. Not just a fan base or a cultural footprint or a set of memorable episodes. A condition of presence, a quality of ambient warmth that exists simply because it has been there so consistently and for so long that the expectation of it has become part of the furniture of the mind. And this quality of ambient presence is the thing that none of the controversies in this video, none of the behind-the-scenes conflicts or the budget arguments or the contract disputes or the creative disagreements has ever fully interrupted. The production has had periods of genuine turmoil. The creative work has varied enormously in quality, from season to season and decade to decade. The people who made the show have had profound disagreements about what it was supposed to be. And the show has aired every week throughout all of it. The couch gag has played. The family has assembled. Springfield has been Springfield regardless of what was happening behind the walls of the production building. This continuity, this pure structural calendar continuity, is the show's most remarkable achievement and its most underrated one. 36 years is longer than most institutions last. Longer than most marriages. Longer than most careers. Longer than some human lives. And The Simpsons has maintained itself across that span with a consistency that is easier to take for granted than it is to replicate. The controversies we have explored tonight are real. The salary disputes were bitter and scarring in ways that changed relationships permanently. The creative decline of the middle seasons was genuine and was experienced as genuine loss by people who cared deeply about what the show had been. The decisions about the archive, what to remove, what to alter, what to retire, were complicated and sometimes handled badly. The gap between the merchandise and the show, between the commercial entity and the creative work, has always been wider than the public presentation suggests. These things are true, but the show endured all of it, not because the controversies were not real or not serious, because the thing the show was providing to its audience was not conditional on perfect creative consistency or internal harmony or a spotless relationship with its own archive. The thing the show was providing was presence. Warm, familiar, recurring, reliable presence. The thing you return to. The thing that is there when you need something to be there. And this is, ultimately, what makes the show impossible to fully understand from the outside in terms of pure quality metrics or creative evaluation. The Simpsons is not only an artistic work, it is also a relationship that has been maintained across 3.5 decades between a production and an audience, and that has accumulated the specific texture that only long relationships develop. The comfortable assumption of the other's continued presence, the specific and somewhat irrational attachment that comes from having been with something through many different periods of your own life. The people who are still watching The Simpsons after 36 years are watching it in bodies that are dramatically different from the bodies they were in when they started. The world has changed around them in ways that would have been difficult to predict. The specific circumstances of their lives, relationships, losses, changes in what they understand and value, have transformed in ways both profound and mundane. And throughout all of it, The Simpsons has been there. The same show, the same family, the same opening credits that you could hear across a room and know immediately what they were. This is the show's secret. Not a conspiracy, not a theory, just the simplest possible truth about why certain things persist in culture in ways that seem to defy ordinary analysis. They persist because people need them to persist. Because the alternative to persistence is absence. And absence from something that has been a constant presence across the significant duration of a human life is a specific kind of loss that is harder to explain than it sounds. The floating timeline, which we have discussed as a mystery and as evidence and as a symptom of something broken in Springfield's relationship with time, is also simply the mechanism of that persistence. The characters stay young because we need them to stay young. Because we have been aging alongside them for 36 years and they have not moved. And there is something in that contrast, our aging and their staying, that is both melancholy and deeply comforting. They hold the age we were when we found them. They preserve the moment of beginning. For someone who found the show at age 8, The Simpsons are always slightly older than them. Not much. Not dramatically. Just enough to be the slightly older siblings of American culture. The people who were already there when you arrived, who were living a version of life that was recognizable to you but slightly ahead of where you were. As the viewer ages, this relationship does not change because the characters do not change. The 8-year-old who watched Bart on a school night and felt a specific recognition becomes a teenager, and then a young adult, and then a parent, and then a grandparent, and through all of it, Bart is 10. He is always 10. He is always exactly the age he was when you first met him. There is a specific kind of grief that attaches to the thought of the show ending that is different from the grief of a show ending after its natural run. It is not grief for narrative resolution. The show does not have a narrative that requires resolution. It is grief for the ending of presence, for the specific quality of Tuesday nights or Sunday nights, or whichever night the show inhabited in your particular history with it, becoming a night that the show is no longer there for. The quiet after. The production will end at some point. The voices will stop being recorded. The credits will roll for the last time on a season that turns out to be the last season. The couch gag will play on a night when there will be no couch gag after it. And the archive will close not formally, but in the sense that there will be no more additions to it, no more new episodes to find their place in the sequence. The show will become entirely historical. When this happens, the archive will still be there. The couch gags and the salary disputes and the guest stars and the pulled episodes and the hidden endings and the Korean animators' signatures and the alternate versions and everything else we have discussed tonight will still be there, exactly as they are, Springfield will persist in the archive the way it has always persisted in the show. Outside time, unchanged, resistant to the pressure of historical accumulation. And people will still find it. Someone who has never seen the show will encounter it for the first time after it has ended and will work through the archive and will find, in Season 4 or Season 1 or Season 7 or wherever they happen to land, something that speaks to them in the specific language of warmth and absurdity and sudden genuine feeling that the show has always spoken. They will feel the thing the show has always been capable of creating in people who are paying attention. The sense that what they are watching is not quite a cartoon, not quite a comedy, not quite a drama, but is instead something else. Something that has its own category. Something that is most accurately described as simply itself. It has been 36 years and Springfield has not changed. The nuclear power plant still dominates the skyline. Homer is still not sure what his boss's name is. Bart is still 10. Lisa is still playing her saxophone in her bedroom, composing a sound that nobody else in the house is listening to. Maggie is watching. Marge is managing. The couch still receives the family at the end of every episode, as it has received them since 1989, in the specific ritual of return that is the show's truest statement about what it is. Whatever it is that keeps you returning the jokes, the characters, the theories, the controversies, the specific quality of company that it provides in whatever room you watch it in, it is still there. It will be there when you wake up.